Moved by James, seconded by Scott. All in favor? Motion carries. Our first presentation is going to be on Fire Smart, and we're going to have Deputy Chief of our Operations of Nanaimo Fire Department, Mr. Jeff Whiting. Deputy? Deputy, you can come up here. That'd be great. Just don't look at the chief and things will go smoothly.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? So Chief Doyle asked me to do a brief presentation on wildfire, just on kind of what the risk is for the city of Nanaimo and some of the things that we do to mitigate that risk. So this will just be sort of a brief overview, and I'll take any questions that you have. Next slide, please, Callista. So in terms of what are...
Who's got the clicker?
It's just on the podium.
It's right here. See, I'm the one that's not.
There we
Okay.
go.
So in terms of...
We'll pause. They want to pause.
Okay.
If she can hear us on Zoom,
Who?
build this up.
Why didn't I ask? I didn't know there was anybody on Zoom. Jennifer,
Just
can you
one.
hear us? Okay, you're muted, but okay.
Yes, I can hear. Sorry, I thought I had sent the confirmation that I'd be attending by Zoom, and it looks like I didn't.
Oh, not a problem. You're here. That's great. Thank you.
I'm here.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks.
You'll just have to make sure that I catch you. I have to turn my back to see you. Hillary will tell me. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in terms of what our risk is, in 2016, there was a community wildfire protection plan completed by a consultant. Community wildfire protection plans, there's something that's done through the province. There's a standard methodology for completing them. They came out of the 2003 Kelowna wildfires. And what this CWPP found, and this is taken out of the report, was that based on the results from the field work and fire behavior threat modeling, the study area as a whole has generally low threat from wildfire, with some pockets of forested areas rated as moderate fire behavior threat. So in general, we have a low wildfire threat in the city, but there are some pockets that are a little higher. Those pockets tend to be places like Protection Island, some of the southern facing aspects of, say, Lindley Valley, that sort of area, Northfield Bluffs, again, the kind of drier areas like that, where there's more grassland. And then there's a couple areas around sort of Westwood Lake as well. And then they also found that when reviewing these fire behavior threat classes, it is apparent that the city is not under threat from continuous crown fire, but is at risk of surface fires. So this is that's pretty standard for the Coastal Fire Center, which encompasses the Vancouver Island, plus the coast, and extends right up to Haida Gwaii. So again, it's a coastal rainforest, so it's different vegetation, different climate than areas like the interior and the north. So some of the other factors that reduce Nanaimo's risk, we have a different climate, topography, vegetation than the interior and the north. So when we do get questions, we often get a lot of questions into the department at times when there's fires. So a few weeks ago when there was a fire around Fort Nelson, whenever there's wildfire in the news and images of wildfire in the news, we get lots of inquiries into the city, into the fire department. People concerned because they live on green space, or there's an unkept yard beside them, that sort of thing. It's not that those things aren't a fire risk. Any particularly dry, dead vegetation is certainly a fire risk. We're really not at risk of the same type of fires that they experience in the interior and the north. So the north, for example, it seems a little counterintuitive that our fire season starts in the north. That's because of the vegetation they have there. The boreal forest, there's a lot of pine trees. They go through a process called spring dip. So between when the snow melts and the new vegetation starts to grow, there's a period when the moisture content in those trees is extremely low. So it's essentially like kindling. And then also the topography there, because it's much flatter, all of the vegetation is on the same growth cycle. So if there's a fire start there, basically the whole forest is extremely dry, and that's why you get very rapid fire growth and behavior there. Same with the interior. If you think about the interior, people like to go there because it's a very dry heat. Here our climate's moderated by the ocean. So an important term in wildfire fighting is something that's called crossover. And that's when the relative humidity drops below the temperature. So for example, it's 30 degrees Celsius, but it's in the 20s for relative humidity. And that just signifies that there's a potential for extreme fire growth. So here in Nanaimo and on the coast, I mean, we might get days like that 6 to 12 times a year, whereas in the interior, that's a daily occurrence. So wildfire reports will have a prediction of when crossover will occur in the day, you know, at 12 o'clock, at 1 o'clock, at 2 o'clock, and then firefighters can anticipate that that's a period of explosive fire growth. So that's just a example of how, you know, the climate, the topography, vegetation, everything's very different. If you think about the interior as well, a lot of grassland, a lot of sagebrush, that's much more flammable than our undergrowth here. So the fires can transition from a surface fire to a crown fire much more readily. If you think about a coastal rainforest undergrowth, it's ferns, salal, things like that. It's much harder for that fire to transition to a crown fire. So crown fires across the Coastal Fire Center are rare. If you think about even last year, it was a big fire year last year across the province. There wasn't a lot of fires on the island. So there was the one, of course, on the way to Port Alberni at Cameron Lake there. There was one up at Sayward, and, you know, we do get them across the island. Usually on the island, the larger fires, they happen in areas of slash and of logging because the vegetation is dry. And often those fires that start in slash, when they get to a tree stand, if it's a mature tree stand, they'll actually slow right down rather than transition into a crown fire because there's more moisture, it's cooler. And mature Douglas fir are actually quite resistant to fire, much more so than spruce and pine that's found in other parts of the province. Some other things that reduce our risk, many of the wildland areas of the city have been or are being developed. So even we seem to have more large fires back in the day when I started in the late 90s. A lot of the areas where we would sort of every year experience a large fire, those are now subdivisions. So there's less areas, there's kind of less areas of interface because there's more development. And then also we have a 24/7 career department. So we generally can get to incidents within a matter of minutes. We have an excellent water supply in the city. So we have hydrants throughout the city. So again, we're still at risk of fires, but we're able to get to them and put them out before they can grow too large. So that being said, wildfire remains a threat. Again, it's more sort of localized ground fires and not the really large crown fires that we see images of in the news. So some of the things that have kind of come out of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan and that have come out through the Community Resiliency Investment Fund grants. These are grants from the UBCM meant to support fire smart principles. Some of the things we do, we support 2 local neighborhood fire smart groups, so one in Long Lake Heights and one on Protection Island. So those are 2 of the areas where there's more moderate or a higher level of threat on protection because it's what's called intermixed because of the housing is all within the forest. And also there's response challenges there, being a separate island. So these groups, these are community groups and they're very active in spreading fire smart information. And what they'll do is in the spring, we will basically facilitate large containers to be dropped off at locations. And the organizers of the neighborhood groups, they have a fire smart weekend where they essentially do yard cleanups, taking out any dead debris, anything like that. And then the fire smart grant covers the disposal of all that waste. Of course, on Protection Island, that means also chipping it, barging it off the island. So on Protection, they do that both in the spring and the fall. So they have a very active group over there. We also do public information sessions where we talk about fire smart principles. We held 2 this past May. The grants pay for staff attendance at BC Wildfire Urban Interface and Fire Smart Conference. And at those conferences, there's lots of education, not only on Fire Smart, but on BC Wildfire training so that we can bring that back to our staff and train to wildfire standards. We do various public education events. We've done the Nanaimo Home Show in the past. We had a booth at the Truth and Reconciliation Day a couple years ago. Over last year, they started a program to develop a sprinkler protection unit trailer. So it's over 4 years. This is year 2 of it right now. And a sprinkler protection unit is essentially a cargo trailer that's filled with sprinkler equipment that can be taken to a neighborhood. Sprinklers basically go on to eave troughs, or they can also go in the yard. It comes with hoses, comes with pumps. They can be hooked up either to a domestic water supply or to a static supply with the pumps and turn those on, and the sprinklers basically wet down the house, the roof, create a bit of a humidity dome over the roof, and then any kind of neighborhoods that are in, under risk from an oncoming wildfire, that helps to protect them. So shortly we'll have that piece of equipment. It probably won't be in full service until next year, but we will have that an additional resource soon. We've also participated in the Community Wildfire Resiliency Committee meetings. So Stanima First Nation held one last year, as did we also had one with the RDN. And completion of a new Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. So they have changed the methodology a little bit since the 2016 protection plan that we did. So we are getting funding for that to complete it probably at the end of this year.
I have a question for you.
Yes, Councilor.
Yesterday, we got something out of the Forest Enhancement Society of BC where there's up to $20 million available for programs. Do we know if our city's applied for any of that? I was thinking more in lines for Bowen Park.
I'm sorry, I don't know. I will look into that, though.
Thank you. Yeah, the RDN didn't know either, so.
Okay.
Thanks.
Just to touch base on what Fire Smart principles are, it basically comes down to what they call the home ignition zone. So it's basically how to protect your house from a wildfire. One of the things they found through a lot of, through fires like the Fort McMurray fire, they did a lot of research following that. A lot of the fire starts weren't from the flame front itself, but from flying embers. They can travel, up to 2 kilometers ahead of a flame front. And it's those embers that actually, what they'll do is there's some really good video actually out of Fort McMurray where you can see where these embers started at a house, at the corner of the house, there was a dry pine tree. And you can see that an ember started that pine tree on fire, and then it got into bark mulch, which led to the house, which started the house on fire. And that was a pathway into the whole neighborhood. So the Fire Smart principles, basically immediately around a home from 0 to 1.5 meters, ideally that's non-combustible. So, rather than having bark mulch, you might have pavers or concrete or lava stone or something that doesn't burn. In that intermediate area, there's a list of Fire Smart plants, that are less flammable plants that are good to have closer to your house. Things like cedars aren't great to have really close to your house. And then in that larger zone, this says 20 to 30 meters. A lot of it's, this isn't really, it's not all totally applicable to city lots because a lot of it's developed for places like the interior where you're talking about large rural properties. But thinning out trees a bit or making sure they're limbed up 2 meters so that a ground fire can't transition into a crown fire. So that's really what the Fire Smart principles are all about. And again, we try and educate people about that. We often get calls into the department from people concerned about green spaces, beside them or near them, and we'll go out to their house and talk to them about things that they can do. Even with green spaces near you, it's essentially about ensuring that there isn't a route from a fire to your house. So, don't have a cedar hedge that leads from the forest to your house. So that's a pathway for fire to travel. So things like that. And, we also tell people trees aren't bad. We don't have to be, worried about cutting down all our trees. Again, mature Douglas fir are resistant to fire. And, again, these big crown fires aren't something that we see a lot here. So it's just about, a lot of it's about housekeeping. So again, cleaning up dead branches, dead needles around your house, making sure your roofs and your gutter are clean, things like that. And then there's some other things I'm going to steal Mr. Lloyd's thunder here, but there's some things that the Nanaimo Emergency Program does as well in terms of wildfire. They have wildfire zone coordination meetings. They look after emergency communications to the public. So if we did need to evacuate a neighborhood, that would be done through Voyant Alert and social media. They look after the emergency social service program, reception centers, Bowen, Bev, and Oliver Woods. So we would have somewhere for evacuees to go if we did need to evacuate an area. Ongoing regional and provincial partnerships and engagement. So with RDN outside other local governments, also with BC Wildfire. Fire weather ongoing monitoring. So we receive through the summer weather reports from Mosaics. They have weather stations all across their land, so we get reports from them. That will tell us if certain areas are in that period of crossover, so we can kind of anticipate an increase in fire behavior. And then Evan's completing a climate hazard assessment, which will include some of the wildfire risk as well in that. And just some other things, just in general, Nanaimo Fire has always dealt with wildfires. Again, it's traditionally at a different level than what you see in the interior and up north. But we do train and equip our staff to BC wildfire standards in terms of the training that we do. We also have mutual aid agreements with the surrounding fire departments. And that's kind of the one big area where we might use a mutual aid agreement is for water supply. So although a lot of our area we have access to hydrants, certain areas we don't, and that's not something that we do a lot of, shuttling water, using water tenders or big water trucks and using portable tanks. We don't have to do a lot of that because of our good water supply, but areas like East Wellington, Landsville, Cedar, they all are very good at that because it's something that is critical to them. And so that's one area where we will ask for their assistance. And we did that last year. Actually, there was probably our biggest fire last year was on the Northfield Bluffs. It was a maliciously lit fire in multiple spots. And we did have both Landsville and East Wellington there assisting, both with staffing and with some water shuttling. And that's all I have for a quick overview. Was there any questions?
Questions? Doug Cullen?
Thank you very much for the presentation. In terms of a specific response for something like Lindley Valley, Neck Point, there's roads that the fire trucks could use, but Lindley Valley seems to have access problems. Do you have equipment that can get in there? Or do you need to improve the roads? When I say roads, I mean just the lanes, sort of.
They are lanes. Actually, we did have a walkthrough last year. We went through with Parks Department, fire staff. Evan from the emergency program came because he has an extensive experience in wildfire. So there are some, we kind of mapped out where we could get, and we did talk with Parks about a couple. There's one sort of it's not really an area where we might need a bridge, but we did map out like the different parts of the park where we would need to access from, because some of them would be from the north side, some of them from the south. So we can get vehicles in there. There's sort of a main road that runs through the center of Lindley Valley. We can get an apparatus through part of that. We have what's called the wildland unit, which is essentially a heavy-duty pickup truck. So, it's able to get into those areas much more effectively than our engines. That is one of the areas, that's probably the biggest area that would be challenging for us, though, again, because there is some potential there on the access issues. We would, somewhere like that, if we had an incident, we'd probably request assistance from BC Wildfire. They will come and assist us as well. So they have different equipment. They can also request air support for things like that. So I would expect that that's something, given that it's located in the middle of the city, that we would get fairly rapidly is some air support in terms of, helicopters.
Before I go to Colin, I just want to introduce Evan Lloyd at the back. Evan, if you could stand up. He's our emergency coordinator. Manager, sorry, yeah. Comes with us, a lot of experience, and as they said, so it's a great asset to our city. So I should have done that sooner, my apologies. Colin?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate all this information. For the, you mentioned the maliciously lit fires. We remember those from last year. There's also been the accidental fires that have come out in like the downtown core, sometimes related to drug-induced psychosis, sometimes related to accidents from people falling asleep with butane torches lit. Most of those have been in areas where it's not flammable materials, but there's a lot of concern, business owners or residents who have who live in structures or have their businesses with timber frame construction. What is the fire department doing to prepare for this year if we, are anticipating something similar to last year in terms of these accidental fires occurring?
In terms of like wildfire and bush areas where, they're started by people that are camping in those areas. Yeah. One thing that we would do as we get kind of into the warmer weather is pre-plan those areas, walk through those areas, see what the risk is. I know that the community safety officers have been very active in places like Bowen Park. Last year we went through a period where there was quite a number of accidental fires started in Bowen Park. So they've been very active in, continually going through there. One, making sure the encampments don't get entrenched, but also making sure they're removing flammable material, things like, propane tanks, and also speaking to the people about the fire risk. So they've been, they've kind of been fire safety ambassadors for us and been doing a really good job on that.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of other, in terms of other risks, the one thing in the city as well is we get notified very quickly. People, I think it's just anecdotally, in my experience, it's been since 2003, there was a real change in terms of people's awareness of wildfire. 2003, the Kelowna wildfires, when they lost, a couple hundred houses. It seems like since then, people have been very aware. We get, a smell of smoke, anything like that, we do get a lot of notices like that. So those are types of fires that we respond to very frequently.
Chief Doyle wants to add something.
Yeah, and can you guys hear my voice well enough? Okay. For the online, it's okay. That's good. Well, one thing that we have done too is we've added resources, which should help in more timely response and a more robust response. But one of the other comments you made was about the lockable lighters, and actually, pardon me. Butane torches, yeah. And actually, Mr. Shaw mentioned that to me as he came into the room, and we're going to catch up afterward, but we could probably pick up on that now because the question's been raised. And I know it has been banned in Vancouver. One of the issues with, not the band's I really support it. That's a Vancouver initiative, a Vancouver Fire initiative. And I think it's a good thing. The only challenge with that is that people still be able to get those devices. Banning them in Vancouver doesn't stop them from people in Vancouver to be able to get them. The other issue with that is not the ban itself, but when it comes to the drug crisis, is that in inhalation of drugs, they're going to find a way to inhale them one way or another. So whether it's the lockable butane lighters, I know Mr. LaBerge and I have talked about this before, they're going to use, they'll use whatever they can, which effectively will be. So I don't know if there's any way to completely eliminate the actual fire hazard in terms of like a lockable butane torches. It's not that, it's a complex problem.
Yeah.
So
I think more so just like for the public's sense of security to just know that like these are risks that are active, and as we get into the drier period of the year, that the fire department is thinking about this, anticipating this, and being ready to respond quickly. Yeah.
Chief?
I think to that point, in our inspection efforts, when we go to, we inspect commercial businesses, and one of the objectives is to ensure that the businesses are free and clear of clutter around the business, but we can't be everywhere all at once. So any community you drive through, not just in Nanaimo, you can see businesses sometimes have that around. So that's a good opportunity to remind people to clear debris that is flammable away from their businesses, whether it be pallets, garbage, anything that's up against, it really is similar to the Fire Smart principles in terms of clearing the perimeter of your business away, debris away, flammable debris away from it, so that if people are finding shelter under eaves and, unfortunately using drugs, inhalation drugs that have a ignition source like that, then it's just not having a clean, free area around your building. And I think our emergency our manager had his hand up there too. So
Evan? Can you come up and use a mic for us though, please? Sure. Thank you.
is this one working?
No, so we've got a
There's
spare
one,
one.
there you go, there's one there. Perfect. Thanks, James.
Hi, just wanted to add one item to the list of actions Jeff had up there was Monday we had our operational subcommittee of the Emergency Management Committee seasonal meeting, so seasonal readiness meeting for summer season where we discussed wildfire, and basically that was an opportunity for all internal city departments to make sure we're coordinated for the various seasonal hazards upcoming, including wildfire, so that our fire service, along with our CMP, along with our communications staff, parks staff, engineering staff, are all aligned so that the various departments and the work that they do to support our seasonal hazards, we're prepared. And one of the things we mentioned was putting together some content messaging for the public to go out through the communications channels that we have to promote good behavior and best practices around heat, wildfire, all of our seasonal hazards for summer. So that's the only thing I really wanted to mention. Thanks.
Thank you. And I just did want to add, and Chief sort of, and I'm just going to get him to add a little bit more to it, but we did add 40 firefighters last year, which a lot of people were very upset about, but there was rationale for it, and it had nothing to do with the medical calls, as some people seem to say. So if you could just maybe explain, Chief, why that was needed, just so that people understand in this room, so they can spread the message that it wasn't done willy-nilly.
Yeah, actually, just very briefly on the master plan, when there was a master plan done about 20 years ago, we got part of the way through completing that, and that stopped in the 20-teens. So when our team came back together, or when our team completed another master plan recently, it basically talked about picking up where that one left off and resourcing outwardly. So, and thankfully council supported that. It was brought in 2022, and they supported phase 1 and phase 2, or 2 parts of the master plan. In our case, that looked like adding 20 firefighters in 2023 and 2025. We're actually just in the recruitment process for that now. So that will help. We'll have more resources on to deal with concurrent incidents, and just more timely response, as well as the appropriate size response to the hazard types, so low, medium, high hazards. So.
And I'll just add too, with the growth of apartment buildings, which is greater challenges for a fire department versus a single, yeah.
Yes, to the chair's point there is that as we typically in the kind of a legacy, as we run out of land, we tend to sprawl less and go upwards. So those are much more resource intensive for the fire service. So those would be classified as, I shouldn't use jargon, but it would be like a medium and higher hazard, which just require more resources. It takes more resources to get fight fires vertically than it does horizontally. So yeah, to Councillor Armstrong's point, the master plan is designed for other things other than medical calls, which we discussed at the last public safety meeting.
Jennifer?
Yeah, to Chief Whiting, I was just wondering what makes our topography and the trees different than what was happening on the road to Port Alberni? So I was the one that raised the issue of wildfire safety for a few different reasons, as you probably know, but the situation on the way to Port Alberni, we've got the same kind of tree growth, and it was incredibly disruptive to a lot of people and pretty scary.
Yeah, certainly. No, I mean, it would be the same topography, climate, vegetation. I think there, if you've driven past there, you'll see that the fire started at the base of basically a cliff, or a very steep slope, and that's what allowed it to travel so quickly up that slope. So, I mean, that is something that adds to fire growth. So, and that's one of the reasons why areas like Long Lake Heights and Linley Valley, those southern-facing steeper slopes, are of a higher hazard, because if a fire starts there, it spreads more rapidly. And so also that area on Cameron Lake there where the fire started, I mean, that's very difficult to fight that fire. And I don't think they could really fight it until it got to the top of that ridge. It was just too hazardous to actually fight the fire on that ridge. It's such a steep slope. So that fire, the growth really had to do with the that steep slope. And again, in the scheme of things, that wasn't a very big fire. When we look at the fires that happened across the province, that's a pretty small fire. It's just where it happened was so disruptive to the transportation.
And I would just add too, fuel mitigation is much harder to do in those areas than in the areas we're talking about. We've got more residents that can do fuel mitigation, because I remember back in the days, we did a lot of fuel mitigation, and a lot of it was done by those that were in our NRCC. They would come out and help us clear out, which doesn't happen anymore. But I know the city's actively involved in Bowen Park and those areas and I don't know about Linley Valley, but doing fuel mitigation. Go ahead, Chief.
And one of the things, DC Whiting touched on it, but on those very steep slopes where the fire had to reach the top of the bank, is that they generally they're generally less stable in the first place, rocky, and with the heating and contraction, that the road being shut down, and we have our emergency manager, so he may want to add on too, but really that the road being shut down was as much the wildfire as the destabilization of the slope. So it being in a very unique topography as well as the destabilization of the slope. I don't know.
Do you want to add to that, Evan?
Evan's background is he's a long time wildfire person. So
Yeah, so I mean, the chiefs are correct. It was a very arid location, so similar to our own moderate risk identified areas. That's a particular, like Cameron Lake Bluffs is where the fire occurred, right? So it's a very arid spot. I actually just happened to be driving past the fire location the morning it started and watched the medium machine bucketing on it, and yeah, had a little memory back to my own wildfire days. I digress. Yeah, so very steep, difficult to access. The loss of the vegetation destabilizes the slope because the vegetation is holding the slope together. So that entire incident wasn't so much a wildfire incident; it was a corridor incident. It was an infrastructure incident. It was a disruption to a one route access location communities. So that was more what the incident was. The wildfire was sort of the cause of the incident, but from an emergency management perspective, that was a corridor disruption.
Anything further, Jennifer? No, okay. Any other questions? Mr. Cullen?
Just for Chief Doyle, when a large commercial building such as the Howard Johnson Hotel is vacant for a long time, does the sprinkler system still work in it, or can the fire department inspect it? Does it become more of a fire hazard?
it is a good question. Yeah, so vacant buildings are inherently can be inherently more dangerous. Having regular activity in them does keep them safer. There's more early detection of everything when there's people in the buildings. Our fire department works very closely in the community to monitor vacant buildings as well as so does the city in general in terms of bylaws. I'll let Mr. LeBeurge speak to that if he wants to after, but our fire department in particular, when we see a vacant building that's uncared for and is a hazard, we do have the authority to have it secured. So that can be in a bunch of different ways. So that's one way that we manage vacant buildings, whether fencing, board up, security, or in our very worst cases, we can, we don't generally have to resort to it, but take the building down. In terms of specific hazards, in terms of the tally ho you asked about, in terms of sprinklers, yes, they are sprinklered. In fact, I think they're having an issue with their sprinklers right now that our fire loss prevention branch is monitoring and dealing with actively. So, but yes, vacant buildings are inherently more challenging because they have less activity in them, and we do have some authority to deal with that, which we do exercise actively on a number of occasions as we speak. So,
Mr. LeBeurge, anything to add?
Nothing substantial, just to say that under the community charter, we have two authorities to deal with vacant buildings, and that's building codes and fire codes. As probably a lot of people realize, old buildings do not have to be maintained to modern building standards. So when a building becomes dilapidated like the Howard Johnson, our only recourse is actually under the fire ordinances. So we can do one of two things. As the chief said, either board the buildings up, or we can go under the community charter under remedial action orders and have council declare them as a hazard. And then we can either have them boarded up, or if the damage is too extensive, then apply to have them demolished. Thank you.
Thank you.
and that's happening in a number of cases. So different levels of ensuring that buildings are safe. So.
Okay, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Deputy. All right, this was just for information. We're moving on to reports, and Mr. Rosen will be introducing this, and that's on the 30-kilometer speed limits.
Thank you, Chair. The city has a school zone policy that dictates the application of speed reductions in the neighborhood of schools. Now, it's been in place for a long time. It's a long-standing policy. Unfortunately, it's not compliant with the Motor Vehicle Act. So a number of our school zones, they're not actually enforceable. So we took a report to council back in February, and it was outlining some options and so on to sort of have a new policy and a bit of a new approach there. That got pulled out of it got pulled out of the council meeting where it was going to be adopted, and a recommendation to have this committee review the matter and provide a recommendation. So we have Barb Thomas here, our Assistant Manager of Transportation. She's going to give a short presentation and describe the recommendation in the report. Over to you, Barb.
How's that? Is it working? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Barb, and I'm happy to take questions throughout my presentation. Thank you for your time today. As Paul mentioned, we are wanting to have a discussion with you and hear your feedback on how we manage speed zones within the city through Council's direction on February 26th. So today I've got 7 components to my presentation: short introduction, conversation about speed limits within the city, how we do the 30 km/h speed limits currently, how traffic calming fits into speed management, the Vision Zero approach, some additional considerations for the conversation, and then our options and recommendations. So, managing speeds is a huge concern. We, in the transportation section, in a year, from last January to this January, we received more than 600 complaints a year, and more than a third of them are about speeding and pedestrian safety. So it's top of mind for many of our residents. By managing speeds, it improves the pedestrian experience. It also helps drivers make better and safer decisions. And what we're talking about is survivability. That's a mouthful. Survivability of a crash. You can see in the graphic that at 50 km/h, about 2 out of 10 people will survive being hit by a car. And at 60 km/h, it's 0. So what we're looking for is making our city more livable and more comfortable for all of the residents in all of their mobility modes each day. We currently operate under a 50 km/h blanket speed limit, and we're able to modify that speed through specialized signing. So we use 30 km/h zones, and we do that with signs. We can also modify a blanket speed zone through a bylaw change. Madam Chair, I'm kind of whipping through. If anybody has any questions, I hope they'll speak up. Thank you. Okay, so 30 km/h speed zones, we use them regularly based on a technical review, and that is sometimes where the road requires it, where you have limited sight distance, where you've got curves and hills, and also where we see high pedestrian concentrations. We currently have 4 programs that are ongoing within the city to do pedestrian safety. The Active School Travel Plan, which we do with in partnership with School District 68. We have the Pedestrian Unallocated Fund, which is Council's additional funding to do pedestrian improvements. We have the Small Improvement Program, and last but not least, we do transportation improvements through our capital plan. We also see a lot of requests for changes to speeds in residential areas and in business areas where people want to be able to move between buildings and move between homes, feeling comfortable and safe. Paul alluded to the difference in the speed zones. So a school zone has a very specific application as defined in the Motor Vehicle Act, and that's where we bumped up against it. When school zones were first envisioned, the purpose of them was to require drivers to slow down when children were present on the road. And what that meant was, outside of those hours, drivers could do 50 km/h. Comparing that to a regular speed limit is enforced 24/7. And that means your 50 km/h is there all the time. except where you have your school zone. But if we put in a 30 km/h regulatory speed zone, that means drivers have to do 30 km/h all the time. And sometimes that's a rub. They don't want to do 30 km/h when they don't see kids on the road. So that was one of the ways that the speed zone, the school zone evolved. Does that make sense? We often receive requests for traffic calming because at the heart of it, people are unhappy with the speeds in their neighborhoods. What I want to show you here is the volume of requests that come in around traffic calming. The 2-year process that we've identified up there is after we've identified a site that warrants traffic calming, and we've taken it to council and received approval to proceed and have funding for it. It still takes us 2 years to get something on the road. It's a long and lengthy process because we need funding, we need resources, and we need to confer with the public on what they'd like to see in their neighborhoods. And public consultation just takes time. It's not something that can be rushed. We want people to buy into what we're doing in their neighborhood and have their feedback on the options that we're presenting.
I just have a question, just for clarification. So if the city decided to drop some of the speed limits to 30 kilometers or a certain area, does that fall under the Motor Vehicle Act, or does that now require a municipal ticket bylaw? Or do you have to go to the province to get approval to drop it down?
On our roads, we can do it through a traffic and highway order. We have the legal authority to do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions around that?
Yeah, Colin?
I'm not sure if this is the right time to ask this question, but what I wanted to understand is, so how do we know how big of an issue pedestrian safety is in the city? Like, do we have what I'm used to seeing is like your hazard identification triangle. Like, you've got your incidents at the top of the pyramid, then you have your near misses, your hazard IDs, and your and then at the base is kind of like the reporting of hazardous conditions.
So we do receive annually a report from ICBC around the crashes in the city.
Right.
There's some challenges with the data because the data is typically at least a year behind. And through the reporting mechanisms, some of the data is lost. So we don't, and pedestrian crashes are pretty rare, so we don't have as good an idea as I think the public would like us to have about where crashes are happening and what kinds they are. I mean, we have a good general idea, but the data that we receive, we use it for sure. It's attention. It gives us attention pointing information, but it's not detailed enough to make.
So the city does not have information on how many incidents or near misses or hazard identifications on a quarterly basis. It gets annual data from crashes.
Correct.
And it's not georeferenced, like you don't know what intersection, you don't know.
Yes, we do get the
Oh, you
intersection.
do?
Yes,
Okay.
it is by
Okay.
location.
You can look it up yourself online.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's public.
But I will add something that, and maybe Eric will correct me if I'm incorrect, but when I was policing last, the majority of pedestrian MVAs or fatalities occur in crosswalks. And if you actually go look at the stats, you'll see that the majority are in crosswalks.
Interesting.
That's where, like, the last 5 that we had that I recall were all crosswalks.
And so, the data that the city receives is a year behind.
Sometimes more, but not less.
Okay. Because, I mean, what's like in the private sector, when like workers go to a job site, they have to report, unsafe conditions, near misses, incidents all the time. And the companies have a very robust data set of the kinds of safety incidents, near misses, and hazards, to the point where they're able to really be able to triangulate, what's going on and where and why, and put in corrective, preventative measures and controls to keep their workers' safe. But it sounds like the way that the province is collecting and disseminating information to the city is that you're mostly blind?
Well, I'd like to speak to that if I may.
Sure.
When something serious happens on our roads, we liaise directly with our RCMP contacts.
But that's reactive.
Right, and so the near miss thing is an AI, it's an AI technology-based notion. We used to use humans to estimate near misses. It's very cost-heavy and time-consuming. Those technologies are coming into play now, and ethically, one of the conversations we have at road safety conferences is around the notion of repairing and fixing things after the fact. When we know that doing things in advance of crashes is more ethical and moral than reacting to crashes. So that's where this notion of Vision Zero comes from. And that's where this notion of speed control comes from, because the intent is that we know humans are going to make mistakes. We know roads are imperfect, and we ought to be doing better in advance of having crashes. So yes, we have crash data, and we want to be able to look at locations that are perhaps performing better, performing less optimally than we'd like to seek, than we want to see. So we want to address locations that have too many crashes, but we also want to be forward-looking and anticipating and improving the situation so that crashes don't happen. And that technology is coming to the fore now with AI, with camera monitoring, and all those other kinds of high-tech features that are available to us. And again, going back to what I talked about with the traffic calming and public consultation, we can't make those kinds of changes without conferring heavily with our partners, council, and the public. Paul wants to say something.
I was just going to add in, the city does have a web-based transportation complaint intake process that we have. It's on our website. It's very well used. We have hundreds of concerns, and some of them are safety related, some of them are there's a pothole, but when there is somebody has like a near miss or something like that, quite often they will go on to that process, and they will submit a complaint that gets reviewed by the transportation staff for its validity and merit, and sometimes that leads to action down the road. So we do have a process to receive those types of complaints.
Thank you for that, Paul. Also, we are implementing a traffic signal management system. And some signals will be coming online shortly. I'm looking at Mr. Rose at the back there. Next year, perhaps, we have 3 signals coming to be tied together. So the traffic signal management system ultimately will be able to see where congestion is happening and monitor the system and make adjustments to the traffic signals so that we get better flow. And from better flow, you get better safety. So that's in front of us as well. Is that?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In your package and on screen, I want to share with you the breadth. We get requests for traffic calming throughout the city. This date has changed a little bit since we submitted the report because we've been working on the traffic calming requests. When we finished this report and submitted it, we had 24 locations where we are still in the process of collecting data and deciding whether or not traffic calming was warranted. You can see throughout the city, we have 17 locations that meet the threshold for traffic calming, and we need to do a little bit more research to decide whether we need to take actual on-the-road steps or what we should do to address the speeding in these locations. We currently have 1 traffic calming project underway, and that's Extension Road, and the work has started out there. And I think it's important that you understand how many requests we get, the process that we have to go through, and then ultimately we get to do 1 project a year, maybe 1 every 2 years, because it is resource intensive. We've done 4 locations in the past few years, and we're monitoring them. We also have, so far in the last couple of years, 30 locations that don't warrant traffic calming. It doesn't mean that there isn't speeding on the road, but it means it doesn't meet our threshold. So why do we care about Vision Zero and managing speeds? In 2021, there were 1,768 Canadians killed in car accidents. 324 of them were pedestrians and cyclists. Transport Canada says speeding is a factor in 25% of the fatal collisions. I tend to think it's more, but that was the online information. We've talked about Vision Zero since our 2014 Transportation Master Plan was adopted or written. I believe it was adopted into bylaw, looking at Mr. Rose. It was adopted in 2022 as part of City Plan, and it's really about making our city a livable, safe, comfortable place to be for all users. In the small picture, I don't know how it turned out on your pages, in your package, Sweden was one of the first countries to adopt Vision Zero in 1990, and they went from having 772 fatalities to 204 in 2020. To achieve road safety, though, we need to take a multidisciplinary, multi-agency approach and a citywide look at it. So based on all the number of complaints we get around speeding, we ask ourselves, is the blanket speed limit still appropriate? How best to manage speeds throughout the city in a community that really does like to go fast? People have a hard time adhering to a posted sign, so we move towards the notion of self-explaining roads. We know from road safety research that people choose their speeds based on how a road looks to them. The information comes through their eyes to their brain, and they choose their speed based on the information that they see. So the city now has complete streets standards, and the notion of the complete street is that each user has its own space. And I like to say a very nice example of this is Metro Drive. Now, when you drive down Metro Drive, you might not know it, but we had to make compromises on the standards. Not the lane widths, contrary to popular belief. But we had to squeeze some things, squeeze some boulevards and so on. And it still turns out to be a very nice street to drive. We were able to scrub some speed off. We still are able to move vehicles. We also have space for pedestrians and cyclists. And the notion of this is when you're a driver on that street, you know what speed we want you to take with your vehicle. And just a little brag here. Last summer in July, we'd had 100,000 users of the bike lane and the pedestrian sidewalk, so.
Not users, trips.
Trips. Trips. Okay.
There's a big difference.
Our counter counted 100,000, so. I think that's a,
40 times.
that doesn't count?
There was one person, they said, went back and forth 40 times.
So now we're at options and recommendations. We prepared 4 options for your conversation and input. The recommended option is that we do a citywide speed limit study. We can continue work on elementary school zones using the 30 km/h school zones as well as the 30 km/h regulatory limit. We can change the blanket speed zone. Bylaw 5000 is due for an update, so this can be incorporated as part of that. Or we can take alternative guidance. So our recommendation is that the Public Safety Committee recommend that Council consider adding a project in 2025 to undertake a citywide speed zone study to review how and where speed zones below 50 km/h are applied, taking into account adjacent land use near schools and urban centers where pedestrians are expected to congregate as part of the 2025 to 2029 financial plan deliberations. And thank you for your time.
Questions?
Happy to take more questions.
Ruth?
How long would that study take? Is there a, if that was to go ahead?
It would take probably at least a year. We'd need consultants to do some research for us, but we'd also like to engage with the public and get feedback on that. So at least a year.
Scott?
Can I ask what the primary research questions would be in this study? To me, it seems like a moot issue. We know where the school zones are. We probably know where the speed issues are, but maybe we don't. So I just don't want to waste too much money on a research study unless the evidence will lead to strategic changes that will make a difference. I know that's hard.
Well, I apologize, but
Jamie's going to come on.
Jamie's going to answer the question.
Jamie.
Thank you. Through the chair of the committee. So I think that a significant amount of that money is actually related to the public engagement. If we start modifying speed limits around the city without the consultation, we're going to encounter things like we've encountered with, thank you, traffic calming. And so there's definitely some data that we want to ingest and look at that's already in our system. But we also, like I say, we really need to go through the public process to understand what the community as a whole is prepared to move forward with. You know, I mean, a conversation that Ms. Thomas and I have had is, you know, is a 40-kilometer-hour speed limit on Bowen Road in multi-use areas appropriate? Some communities would say yes, some would say no. This is a question that we need to understand so that when we do in fact move forward with it, excuse me, the entire community will support whatever actions need to be taken to achieve that goal.
Follow up and then call it.
So public opinion drives these strategic decisions, like as far as speeds, or does the fatality and crash data drive these decisions? Like, I'm worried about a waste of money on a study is what, I feel like these studies have been done in probably cities all over Canada.
So through the chair, I would say that as I say, the core of that money is to gain an understanding of community support. Because if we, as an example, traffic calming, we have, I think, roughly $100,000 a year to take action on that. We have a massive backlog of areas that need to be addressed. And so if we want to fully commit to that, there's a financial component to it. And if the community doesn't support that, then we won't have access to those funds. So this is the connection we need to make from desired outcome, committed investment, final deliverable, and success.
Colin?
I'm having a hard time understanding this as anything other than a consultant make work project. And frankly, if we're going to be recommending to the council that they do something related to traffic calming and reducing speeds, I feel like the city should just ask the public and not give a bunch of money to a consultant to do a report that's going to sit on the shelf and give you the answer that you already know you're going to get anyway. Like this is actually kind of pissing me off, to be honest.
Well, I can tell you when we looked at 40 kilometers, my mailbox was full of people opposed.
Point of information.
Colin, sorry, when you seem to be saying that there's a answer that we already know, I would love to have insight into what that answer is that you think we already know.
Well, we already know where the pedestrian safety issues are. Like that, so why are we doing a study to look at reducing speed zones when we already know where the concerns are? They're around schools, we know that. And we know that there's issues that need to be addressed, and the city has already been made aware of those. So I don't see why we need to do a study for this.
Going to go to Jamie?
So through the chair, I think that it's fair to say that there are areas where we know are sensitive to speed already. I think there's a lot of other areas that we could be more proactive with and be more purposeful in implementing speed management tools. And so if we can understand that a particular corridor, a particular neighborhood could benefit from it, then there may be an opportunity to find a way to support action in that area independent of a traffic calming specific project.
Can the city just do that survey and ask the public rather than hiring a consultant to do it?
Jamie?
There are a lot of things that we can do, but unfortunately our resources are stretched pretty thin already. I mean, as Ms. Thomas indicated, I think last year we had 600 calls for service. This year we're projecting for like 800 plus. We're still trying to manage the traffic calming list that we already have. We're also processing requests for traffic.
And I'm just going to ask or add that we're also running vacancies that we've been trying to fill for, what, a year, 2 years, that just can't get filled. So
Several.
there is a capacity issue, no doubt. Colin?
The consulting reports are generally done on a 3-to-1 multiplier basis. You're paying fees at 3 times the wage. So I would suggest that it would be more cost effective to hire somebody at the city to do this work.
We're trying, but like I said, we've had some positions advertised for quite a while, and there's competition all across the province, and not only province, the country. So, but, I mean, you don't have to take this recommendation. This is the board's, your committee recommendation. I will add, and Jamie was there, when we lowered the speed on Departure Bay down to 40 kilometers, when we actually looked at what the speeds went after we lowered it, they actually increased from when it was 50 kilometers, which was quite interesting. Go ahead, Jamie.
If I could just make one last comment in that question, it can be done internally. There's no question about it. But the question is, how long do you want it to take? And I think somebody asked the question of how long would it take? If we had a third party do it, we likely could do it in a year. If we have to wait for staff to be able to add this task to the side of their desk, I'm guessing it would take 2-3 years. And so, we have a significant backlog of operational-based tasks we're trying to process right now, and to try and add a proactive one, we don't have the bandwidth without some sort of external support.
I followed the testing grounds in England, and it was really interesting, was the actual accidents increased significantly when they lowered the speed limits because people didn't obey the speed limits. There's frustrations. It's much safer for pedestrians, there's no doubt. That, I mean, contrary to what that report says, I've been to accidents where people have been struck at 80 and 100 kilometers and survived and didn't even have a lot of serious injuries. It depends on the mechanism of injury, where they get, how they get hit, if they get fully run over, whatever, right? So I think we have to decide what we're looking for. If this is about pedestrians, absolutely, you're going to see a decrease. If it's about car accidents, you're going to see an increase. Scott?
Last question, I promise. So is there anything broken? That's what I'm confused. Well, the schools, do you envision school zones changing, or a whole bunch of them going back to 50 or not? Like, this is just specifically about the school zones that already exist in a way. Like I've heard, someone mentioned, can't we just put some stickers on the signs and solve this problem for a lot cheaper? Or are there some that are major problems that you would like community feedback so that you can address them? Or are there a bunch of schools that no one's...
So
It requires a study.
there's, as Ms. Thomas indicated, some of the school zones are in conflict or are inconsistent with the Motor Vehicle Act. And so that creates a situation where the RCMP can't, there's problems enforcing it because there's a misunderstanding of A versus B and whether it's this or that. And so there are a number of school zones we need to look at and align them with the regulatory documents. The other motion, as I understand it, that came from the council discussion was talking about speed limits in high pedestrian conflict areas, broad spectrum. So whether it's downtown, whether it's an urban center, whether it's a playground area, whether it's something else. So that is a higher, more general statement. And so that's where we get into the conversation, not unlike what Saanich went through a few years ago. What is the appropriate speed to have a safe road network where you fundamentally eliminate fatalities and injuries? So,
Colin?
So maybe just to clarify, is this about pedestrian safety or vehicle collision reduction?
Pedestrian safety.
I would say it is about human safety. So pedestrians are the most vulnerable road users. And I mean, those are stats that were in that graphic, and it's not absolutes. I mean, there was a few years ago, we had 2 incidents where children were struck by vehicles at less than 10 miles an hour. One of them bounced back, hopped up, walked away, no harm, no foul. The other one died at less than 10 miles an hour. So, pardon me?
It's called mechanism of injury.
Yeah, and it's unique to each situation, but statistically, the faster a vehicle's going, the more likely that the occupants or the person connecting with it are going to be severely injured or worse. And so when we look at road safety, the most influential factor is how much speed and energy is involved. The less there is, the higher likelihood there's for safety.
Doug Colling?
Thank you very much for the report, and the written material was very helpful. I noticed there was a report from Edmonton about how things worked out there, and one of the aspects of the report talks about how you can get a false sense of security from the speed signs.
That's right.
Because there's a certain element that just
100%.
either they're distracted or they're
Yeah.
just not going to obey it anyways. And then also the fact that whatever the limit is, there tends to be a general flow. I think 53 kilometers per hour was mentioned. And then you get into the problem that if you get a gap in what speeds are doing, if someone is doing 25 and someone else is doing 50, it's inconsistent for the pedestrians, it causes problems. So it's a big package of issues. And all the schools are different. Is the extension road calming, is that for Chase River School? Because Chase River School is what I would call a high-risk school as compared to, say, Cinnabar, which is tucked into an enclave.
So the extension road traffic calming goes from the Chase River School all the way down past Richardson. So that whole section is being covered by traffic calming.
And traffic calming seems to be more effective than the speed signs in my experience, like things like four-way stops around school zones at Forest Park. Randerson Ridge has the speed bumps, and Solaire has the signs on the road that really remind people.
Thank you. Ruth?
This might be a bit sort of off topic or offside in terms of this report, but has it been addressed in terms of education? Like you were saying, Chair, that most fatalities are happening in crosswalks. So I grew up in East Vancouver, really, really busy, and we did not take it for granted that vehicles would stop for you. So I was always taught as a child, make eye contact with the driver, and I've taught my children, just because you're in an intersection or a stoplight or a crosswalk does not mean that they may stop. They may not see you, whatever. Also, I see a lot of people driving who appear to be under the influence of substances in the South End, like really, really intensely. So there's a lot of stuff going on. If we know that the majority of, if we know where the pedestrians are being hit, if we have this knowledge, that would be great. But even if we don't, can we look at education as something that could take a big impact, hopefully? Is that?
Barb?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So yeah, road safety, we call it the 3 E's. So there's education, enforcement, and engineering. And so yeah, education does form a large component of it. And we have partners around that. ICBC for one, we work with the school district. So yes, education is a huge part of it. And I would say there's a 4th E, equity, but yeah. So yeah, definitely.
Go ahead.
Education is harder to accomplish though, and even with education, it still requires a cultural shift. It's like the shift we had to make over drinking and driving or wearing our seatbelts. It's generational to make those kinds of changes.
Yeah, I see, my brother's a letter carrier, and he's out there on the street, and he's really seeing, he's commented, especially over the last year, a real change in the culture of driving with pedestrians. He's like, I almost get hit at least once a week now. He's like, people are not stopping at stop signs. Like, it's becoming much more aggressive and kind of urbanized, the driving, and we know that Nanaimo's growing very, very rapidly. What did they say? We're the 5th fastest growing city in Canada. So perhaps one thing that we can do is to think ahead about the fact that we are going to be having more and more people on the roads, driving maybe not in a nice island time kind of way. And is that also something that we could do to prevent?
Jamie?
Yeah, and I think that is what Ms. Thomas highlighted through our complete street standards. Having the self-explanatory streets where pedestrians have a pedestrian realm, cyclists have a cyclist realm, and vehicles have a vehicle realm. And that is foundational to that proactive, like changing our network to condition people to use it the way we want them to, as opposed to having to come in afterwards with enforcement or education and reteach them or punish them for doing things that we didn't want them to do in the first place. And so, the notion of our raised local intersection crossings really highlighting to drivers that, this is an area where pedestrians are the priority, and you're entering their realm as opposed to them having to try and cross yours. And so there's definitely a culture of car first in Nanaimo, and the increasing pressures on the system are creating more senses of urgency or, I think you can sort of philosophically look at it as the demands on people's time, and there's so much going on in people's heads that I have to go from point A to point B to pick up my kids and drop off this and do that and do that, that there's sort of this tunnel vision, and if there's a pedestrian or cyclist on the side, it's just noise. And so this is where we have to create these streets where people realize what we want them to do to keep everybody safe. And so, to be quite frank, we have some very interesting conversations at school tables with this conflicted messaging of, I'm in a hurry and I need to get out of here, but everybody's speeding around my child. And so it's illuminating to hear these.
I don't know if Inspector Rochette, do you get many complaints, from the public on school zones?
We do get regular complaints for sure. We try to obviously focus, if it's, focus on one school, we try to send our officers there. But it's an interesting comment there. Sorry, I missed part of it because I was on the phone, but a lot of the time we get complaints from a school and we attend and enforce. And unfortunately, some of the tickets are given to parents.
Complainers, yeah.
Yeah, complainants. So it's that concept that, yes, people are speeding around me, but I'm in a hurry as well. So I personally gave one to someone that drove by a school bus, and I recognize a mom that I know from soccer, and I know she has kids, and, at the moment, she was really not upset with me, but upset of what she did. But at the same time, she wasn't thinking about what she was doing, right? She was in her way to go to work because she was late for work. And so that's an interesting aspect. It's always an interesting conversation, but we do obviously get, mainly the complaints are related to school zones. Sometimes too, when we get several complaints, we're focused on school zones here, but different locations where people say, oh, there's a lot of speeders. Sometimes it's perception, right, that we attend. And sometimes just the problem is if we're there for a day or two, obviously then everybody behaves for a while. So then we see a reduction of speed and we don't see any enforcement and tickets. So then we kind of well, it's not really a problem. But, that's a fact that we've seen, and with social media, people know right away. So we try to move around, and there's always 4 or 5 different locations that comes up on a regular basis, and kind of try to bounce around.
Would it be fair to say that sometimes you put your volunteer speed watch in some of the school zones with boards and stuff, which has been affected by it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so that's the education aspect of it. We use our volunteers, and they have the big signs. So just to help with capacity as well, right? We don't have unlimited resourcing, so sometimes we can be present, but there's a policing presence there, right? Even if the volunteers are representing the RCMP, they're representing authority, and people do listen to them. So,
Jamie, you wanted to add something?
I was actually, there's 2 things that I wanted to touch on. So resourcing. I think the traffic division is made up of about 8 members right now, possibly 6. And so, when we look at this sort of, or we kind of explore this discussion around enforcement, and if you think about 6 members covering the entire city, it gets very thin very quickly. And so this is where we have to come back and bring that conversation back to creating a road environment that gets the behavior that we want, as opposed to hoping that this enforcement can rein it back in. I also was recalling when we were working with one of the schools that in Victoria they did, and we did it up here as well, but there's quite a dramatic incident in Victoria where the RCMP and ICBC did a program called Think of Me. And so what ICBC does is take like postcards to the schools, and children can color them in and fill them out and put their name on it. And then the RCMP come and do an enforcement program out of school. Instead of giving out tickets, they give out these postcards that were created by the students.
We did do that here.
And, yeah, we did. In Victoria, a mom got her own child's ticket, basically. And so, you know, it was that very sobering incident of, I'm speeding in my own child's zone. And so, you know, that can be quite impactful for one person, but that's very dilute. So.
Councillor Eastmer?
Thank you. Just having a look at options 2 and 3 under the 4 options that we could consider. Just have a question for number 2. It says that the application of 30 kilometer per hour, both school zones and regulatory, would appease public safety concerns for child students. I'm just wondering, like, do we have a measure of the number of public safety concerns, or is that sort of just a general comment based on how we got to this conversation today?
I think that that's the sort of expectation that when we hear the request for a speed limit reduction, that if we just action this, then we've sort of met the expectation. The concern that follows with that, though, is the efficacy. And I think as somebody mentioned, like, if we just put signs up, have we done what we need to do? And the chances are not likely. So.
But it could be a step forward. Okay, and then just with the option 3, the first advantage says this would address public desires for reduced speed limits in the city. So again, it's sort of.
I'm sorry, which option was that?
Under option 3, the first point says the advantage of a citywide blanket 40 kilometer per hour speed limit change would address public desires for reduced speed limits in the city.
It would, for sure. But again, there's the question of the broad expectation of what that actually means. And, you know, one of the things that we encounter is once we reduce a speed limit in an area, we will instantly see a spike in calls for enforcement and calls for traffic calming if people don't believe that it's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Judge Cullen?
Just with respect to option 2, and Ms. Thompson, I think it is an option under the Motor Vehicle Act to put up a sign underneath the 30 kilometer sign, much like the no turns between 3 and 6 p.m., that you could put a 30 kilometer sign up and not have it 24 hours, but say 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then outside those hours, you default to the 50. And, but you don't see that much because we've been using the school zone signs. But I think I don't think it's all or nothing. I think you can time limit the speed zones.
Does that not require, though, provincial approval?
No, we have the authority to make speed limit regulation changes, and we can include time parameters to them. However, it becomes more complicated to enforce. And so I think if we were going to entertain that discussion, I think we would need to have a fairly deep dive with the RCMP and get a bit of a gauge on how.
I don't know why it would be more complicated to enforce, because they would know the times. It's pretty straightforward. Wouldn't you say, Eric? If it's between 8 to 5, they know that on the signs, because you physically have to go look at the sign every day before you can issue a ticket, or if you go to court, if it's disputed and you haven't done that, the ticket gets tossed. Just so you know, it has to be done daily. So they would know what the time, right?
There is also a bit of user understanding.
It's no different than a school zone to me, but.
So, because when we look at time here, we're talking about school zones, outside school zones, right?
Like
we're
on
looking at
Upland, you know, on
speed.
Uplands, they've got a school zone, which is an illegal school zone because it doesn't front the school.
Yep.
So it's a very large distance of 30 kilometers. So that's the one that, there's Hammond Bay and there's Pleasant Valley that are all illegal. So that would be the ones where they'd want to keep it, and they would put it in between 8 and 5 for the sake of argument.
Okay.
Yeah,
thought?
go ahead.
I think what we're talking about, excuse me, are variable speed limits, and that's a kind of a tough nut to crack.
It's not
So,
variable, it's no different than a school zone, that's always between 8 and 5.
yeah,
Or-
but that's specifically covered in the Motor Vehicle Act, so it's, I think, just a bit more of a challenge, so. Maybe it isn't, but we're happy to explore it if
Colin?
that's the committee's wish.
I just coming back to the actual text of the recommendation. So the ask is review, so the study is to review how and where speed zones below 50 kilometers an hour are applied, taking into account adjacent land use near schools and urban centers where pedestrians are expected to congregate. So the city has a geospatial database of the roads and the speed limits on those roads and where the crosswalks are and the land uses. So beyond that, just that basic data compilation, which is be a map, like a GIS product, what is the intention to also explore all these options as part of that study, or is that a different study in addition to what we're suggesting?
Jamie?
So I think one of the other things that, in addition to the public engagement that we would need to go through, there also needs to be a technical review of, like, basically a test of what the speeds are that we're already seeing in these areas, because we may look at sort of neighborhood roads and feel that they should be a lower speed limit, but find that majority of them are already operating at a 40 or 45 kilometer an hour speed limit, so maybe no change is needed. Or maybe it's already doing what it's supposed to be doing at an operational level. And so we have road speed data on a number of roads, but we've got 600 kilometers of road and not all of it. And, you know, we would want to do a bit of a test on different sort of scenarios, whether it's an urban center, whether it's neighborhood, whether it's park, et cetera, to sort of see how those roads are actually performing, because we may end up finding that more than we think are actually operationally satisfactory.
And so that activity would be part of the scope of this project that
would need to be.
Any other questions? Okay, James?
Not a question. I was just going to see if it's in order. I feel comfortable moving the recommendation.
Is there a seconder for the main recommendation?
Sorry, which was the main recommendation? Like, I'm in favor of option 2.
Okay, so the main recommendation is that the Public Safety Committee recommend that council consider adding a project in 2025 to undertake a citywide speed zone study to review how and where speed zones below 50 kilometers are applied, taking into account adjacent land use near schools and urban centers where pedestrians are expected to congregate as part of the 2025-2029 financial plan. So that was option 1. So some people want 2, so if there's a seconder for this one, we'll have discussion. If not, then somebody can put another recommendation on the table.
Can I just ask a question?
Oh, we need a seconder first.
It's a question about the nature of the motions.
Okay, I'll allow it. Go ahead.
Just for clarification, are the options presented in order of, like, recommending number 1 would be the best option and number 2, or are they just like the numbers are immaterial and those are just three options and there isn't one that staff are particularly trying to throw more weight
There's
behind?
just the recommendation.
Option 1 is the recommended
Okay.
option.
So is there a seconder for that motion? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so that one fails. Is there another motion that somebody would like to put forward? Councillor Ismail?
Well, I heard Doug Cowling suggesting moving option 2, and
Did you want to move 2, Doug?
I move option 2, but with no disrespect for the other option, but option 2 involves doing something about this, sorry.
No, once again.
Sorry.
There you go.
Thank you. It makes sense to me that option 1 would continue in the background, but what I like about option 2 is that it does something about the regulatory limits now, not in 2 years, and still permits option 1 to, happen. So at this time, I'm in favor of option 2.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Ruth. Ruth, would you like to say anything further, since you seconded?
I just like that it's something that's more immediate and the cost is none as well.
I would say the good thing about option 2 is if you do look, and Barb had mentioned it, is it's about equity. When you go look at Fairway School, they've got a block. Then you go to the North End schools, and some of them have got half a kilometer and whatever, so I think it would bring more equity into it, so. Yeah. If there, any other discussion? Seeing none, oh, sorry, James?
Just a question about what council gets from this. So these recommendations come to us. Are they also available for your
Yeah,
deliberation?
so what'll happen is you'll make your recommendation, this recommendation will go to council, council can accept it or they don't have to. They may decide that, you know, we don't want it, we want option 1 or whatever, but it's a recommendation that comes from this committee. Ms. Robertson?
I just wanted to clarify for Committee Member Cowling that option number 1, as I understand it, would not be happening in the background unless there was direction provided from this committee. So it is possible to do more than one recommendation, but the committee can debate that afterwards. But if it's just
We'll
number,
just stay
just
with
wanted to
2
make
for
sure
now,
that
thank you.
you were aware.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Is Jennifer there? Okay, none opposed. Motion carries. Option number 2, please. Thank you. Let's we'll take a 10-minute recess back in at 22 for people. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. to our committee work plan, roundtable. Are you introducing that, Ms. Robertson, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What we did is, just to sort of help facilitate the discussion today, staff have compiled a list of topics for the work plan, and we put them into themes. And we would have liked to have circulated this earlier, but we were getting all these topics in last minute, so we wanted to include as many as we can. And so we thought that sort of the process today would be just to go, to have each committee member go around and speak to the
Excuse me?
items that they...
Yeah, I haven't seen her for a while.
No, she's been on, she was there.
Oh.
She's not currently on.
No, yeah, okay. We'll go ahead anyhow. Yeah.
So, so on the screen, as mentioned, everyone's topics have been included and put into a theme. And we did identify near the bottom about ones that people had mentioned, and Natalie just where there's other levels of government either involved or it's their their jurisdiction of responsibility. So we just highlighted those there. So we thought that each committee member could just maybe briefly talk about the topics that they had submitted, and then it'll also give the committee members who didn't have a chance to have theirs recognized, include those in today, and Natalie will type them up as we go along. And then once we've got a comprehensive list, then we'll go through and have the committee do a general discussion and pick their top themes and top topics. And then from there, it would be referred back to staff so that we could come back to the next meeting with a draft work plan for the committee to consider endorsing. And that's because before it's adopted, we want to make sure that the proposed actions are within the jurisdiction of the city and that they're actually achievable within the committee's time frame. So that's sort of how we thought we envisioned to have it start.
So I guess we'll start with number 2 then, one is the topics, then number 2 is traffic issues. Is that how you want to do it?
I thought by committee member, I mean, because
Okay.
they will know their topics that they submitted, and maybe
Okay.
just briefly provide an
So I will start
explanation.
to my right, and I'll start with Ruth.
Okay, so it was not easy to think of so few topics with such a widespread, huge umbrella of safety. One thing that I did want to talk about that was my idea was long-term monitoring around some of the projects that are coming into the city. So I think we're at the point now that a lot of neighborhoods are concerned when projects are announced that they're going to happen. So what my concern was around like long-term monitoring programs, which would include baseline monitoring and controls if possible.
Are you talking low barrier housing?
Yeah,
Okay.
specifically around low barrier housing, things like that. So the Heart and Hearth program is something that I know, as an example, is coming into the South End. I hear people at work talking about it. People, are a little abuzz. And I want to increase transparency and increase information. So, we want people to have buy-in for projects that we're putting into their communities. And if BC Housing, et cetera, wants the public to believe that there will not be negative impacts, then we need to collect that information. Because people are concerned, I think, legitimately. I understand that the province is in the driver's seat in terms of inserting these projects. That's something that the public doesn't always seem to understand. There's a lot of anger directed towards the city. I'm thinking that if the city can collect information, then depending on how it goes, we can have the compare and contrast of like, here's what it looked like before this project, here's what it's looking like 6 months after. And then the city can then use that information to advocate for communities in the event that the impacts are serious and negative, especially then advocate for financial supports from the province to address the impacts, as well as being able to maybe advocate for spreading these projects out, or even something like the Heart and Hearth program that could be a new idea to say, hey, this did work or it didn't work. I think there's a lot of fear out there. Nobody wants to have what happened, say, the Newcastle community happen to them. And I know from my own experience, it's very difficult to push water uphill after the fact. and to kind of be screaming into the wind and having people say, well, I think that's just your opinion. It's not that bad. We have the Rona there. We have Living Forest. Also to reach out and build relationships so that it's not after the fact and people are coming to city council or, sending angry emails or emailing their MLA and MP and not getting a response like I've experienced. That's my number one priority.
I will address part of that. So one of the issues we have with that is when we're meeting with the province and whatever, we're not allowed to speak about it. So it becomes privileged until, I'll be honest, I voted against that location. 2 of us did, and the rest voted for it. So that will come out because we're allowed to say that now because a project has been announced. I've been asking BC Housing for years for stats to support how many people are going into recovery. It's not available. They won't give it to us. We've been asking for security. Well, now they're not providing security like they used to. So there's all these issues, and then we're left holding it. Like it's the provincial downloads, which is, to me, is terrible because we as a city only collect 8% of the tax base. They get 42 and the feds get 50. We do get stats from the police if we ask for them around those things, but not all of that can be released because there's privacy issues, et cetera. So there's a lot of issues with how the government is putting that out there. Like, we do have good neighborhood agreements. I don't know if Mr. Lindsay, if you want to add anything or not, but we as a city know that there's a lot of issues with these, and we advocate constantly we want to get ahead of this. Like, we want to have these meetings before we even announce a location, but we keep getting quashed. But Mr. Lindsay has worked on these files for about 8 years now, Dale? So for those that don't know, Dale Lindsay is our CAO of the city, and he's had the housing portfolio prior to coming on as a CAO for as long as I've been on council, which is coming on 7 years. Mr. Lindsay?
Thank you, Chair. I was just coming to observe in the back. I wasn't expecting to be called upon, but yeah, not anymore. So there's many staff here who could probably jump in and worked on this file and could help contribute to this conversation. I would say that the city is very much aware of the challenges when working with BC Housing to identify sites. The challenge is always trying to find that perfect property in a community that's growing and there's demands for land. It's extremely challenging. Having said that, there's things we do. I think once sites are established, and we have in the past worked with BC Housing on good neighbor agreements, on ongoing committees to try to mitigate impacts. I'm not going to sit here and say there's no impacts from setting up any of this. I think that would be naive to say that. But in terms of, I think your question of, setting a baseline and looking forward, I think that's something, if that was an interest of the committee, I think that's something we could absolutely do. I mean, we have data in terms of calls for service, RCMP have data for calls for service. So if that's the kind of suggestion you're making, I think that's absolutely something that we could do if that was work with you, if that was a priority for the committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Destiny?
I'm just wondering, don't we already?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hands.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, we already have some permanent supportive housing projects in the city, one in the north end, and I think we have another one mid-city.
There's 4.
Pardon me?
There's 5 now.
Okay, so anyway, I'm sure that there must be some kind of information pertaining to how the public reacted when they first learned that these sites were going in their neighborhoods, and now what their reactions are, like some of them 5-7 years later. So I'm just wondering, collecting extra data, would that be part of it?
That's a good point. I know when, because I was, myself and Dave LaBerge actually were on the RCP selling Uplands Walk. Selling Uplands Walk when it went in. Because of the concerns raised by the community, they changed the people going into that, and it was women over 45 years old with alcohol problems. So in the last 2 years, there's been a change of people going in there, and crime has gone up considerably. I live in that area, so I can speak to that. So I think that's a valid point. We need to look at who's going in, where they're going in. When we looked at the Cranberry housing, when that was going to go in, it was like a 9-0 vote originally. Then all of a sudden we come back from Richmond and we hear at a community meeting that we weren't even at because we were in Richmond, that they've changed the criteria of people going in here, and they're putting in the hardest of the hardest to house at 2 schools, 3 seniors facilities, Boys and Girls Club. So of course it got voted down, right? Because is that the right place for that? So I think that's a conversation that BC Housing has to be aware of. Like, there's a place for some of these, right? You know, like there's a place for seniors, there's a place for seniors, there's a place for families. Is there a place for the hardest to house? Numbers was another issue that came up, like when we were working on it, 32 was the number identified as maximum. BC Housing doesn't have that now under this government. 50, 75 is fine. So I think that's a valid point. We should be looking at collecting the data, but good luck trying to get it out of BC Housing. I've been asking for years. Ruth?
Yeah, so that's part of it, is that I've been in the seat of trying to get data from the province and from BC Housing. You're lucky if you can even get a phone call back. I think that if we are going to be put in the position as a city to have projects inserted into wherever, we owe it to the residents and the businesses to be open and transparent and collect this information. I also believe that you cannot get anywhere without being in good relationship. And that's what my own personal beliefs from my cultural beliefs. So instead of having something pop up beside a business, how about we've already gone and talked to them and said, hey, you know, let's not pretend at this point that there may not be negative, pretend there won't be negative impacts. I was on that Good Samaritan House, the Samaritan House Committee. Because when it popped up, I live in the South End on Victoria Road. When it popped up, there were concerns. So I think we need to be more proactive, and I think that would do a lot for people to feel heard and safe.
We'll put that down as a recommendation. More information going out. I mean, we're going to be limited. I know Mr. Lindsay's heard the concerns, and we'll go from there. Ms. Roberts?
Sorry, Madam Chair. I just want to say that we've got a number of topics to get through. And so the idea hopefully was that each individual committee member would introduce their topics, and then collectively, once everybody's done that, there would be kind of a debate
So you want
about which ones.
discussion right away then?
I think everybody should have an opportunity to introduce their ideas in the interest of time.
We'll move on then to Destiny. Thank you.
Was that all? You only said, I was just.
No, we're only doing one right now. We'll go around after, yes, because then otherwise, well, then we're not going to get through everybody. So I would like to go through their top priorities first, then we can come back to their second priority, then do their third. Because we're already at 5 o'clock, we need 15 minutes for question period. So if we can do one first, then we'll come back and do your second one, please. Thank you. Destiny?
I also had on my list increased use of CCTV and, if possible, some incentives for more use of it in areas that are looked at as having higher problems in the community.
After Mr. LeBerge, I'll have you answer that after on the use of CCTV. Okay, Kim?
Yeah, one of my subject matters was also around safety and safety for our officers on the street and people who are assisting and working with these individuals. And I don't know, do the community safety officers wear body cams at all? Bylaws officers don't either? And so you were saying that sometimes now they are some of the first responders as opposed to the RCMP, which is more expensive and they have other things to be doing. Would that not be a safety type of thing for both the responder and for the person that they're responding to?
Body-worn cameras are more about gathering evidence than safety, because of course you're not going to be able to view the footage until after an incident has transpired.
But safety for the individual also that the call has been made against.
One of the issues with that is we have to find places to store all that. It's extremely expensive. And I know that was one of the reasons why the rollout to the RCMP, they had to find ways of storage, how long it stays, and the cost factor.
As far as the evidence, is that what you're
No,
saying?
anytime you're taking pictures of individuals, whatever, by law, you have to store it for a set period of time. I don't know if is it 7 years for those, depending on the offense.
Yeah, and if I could add, Chair, policing and bylaw enforcement are two different animals. Bylaw officers don't have powers to arrest, to search, to use force. It's a completely different role, so I'm not quite clear what the safety concern is for people that the community safety officers are encountering.
Okay. Okay, moving on to James for his number one.
I didn't bring anything specifically to the table for this. I guess when I applied for the committee, sort of the addictions issues and their effect on the community would have been in the back of my mind. But also, I guess, just trying to understand how this body interacts with council and staff and other agencies and how we can advocate best.
Okay, thank you. Doug?
My priority would be to have some sort of a safety liaison person in the schools, whether that was a community safety officer, a social worker, or an RCMP officer, whatever they could get in there, or a team.
I believe we still have school liaison officers here. I think there was 4 or 5 now.
Yeah, so we do have, there's 6 of them with the person in charge. So they're the youth liaison officer. So they spend majority of their time with the different schools and within the community.
Okay, thank you. Scott?
I was reading all the point-in-time data reports, and I was pretty amazed by how disproportionate Nanaimo is in terms of the number of unsheltered people and unhoused, and that proportion's pretty amazing to me, like the worst in Canada. So per capita, worst in Canada, and then also sleeping outside at night, worst in Canada is what I read repeatedly, but it's data. So focusing there seemed important to me. Like many other municipalities seem to be able to get the unsheltered into shelters, at least at night, and we cannot do that here for some reason, and I don't know why. So that was my main one, is acting on that data.
Perfect. Colin?
Yeah, the first one that I have is for the Public Safety Committee to use its collective voice to pressure the provincial and federal government to treat the opioid overdose public health and safety emergency as the emergency that it is and address the root causes, which is an ineffective and public health and education system which is not working for the people who desperately need it the most, and a judicial system that is not able to hold organized criminals accountable for their crimes. And most of my priorities are related to the issues of addiction and addiction-related crime in Nanaimo.
Thank you. So I'd say for our first one, even going on to what Ruth said, a lot of it's about addiction and how are we compiling the information, how are we getting it out to the community. Would that be fair? That would be a good capture for our Kim?
But also, how are we helping the people that are suffering the
Yeah,
most, which are
yeah,
the people on the street?
Yeah. Even though, again, that's not our responsibility as a municipal government, but we are doing it. Yeah.
Hence the pressuring the provincial and federal government to treat the emergency as the emergency that it is.
Okay, does that sound, did you capture that?
We're highlighting each of
Okay,
them.
perfect. Okay, I'm going to go number 2 priority for Ruth now. All of us without our mics, yeah.
Thank you. I think my number 2 priority is about reclaiming public spaces, libraries, parks, et cetera. I know I live in the South End, I have children, and there's been a significant sort of degradation of public spaces in terms of just antisocial behaviors, drug paraphernalia, having to do sweeps before I allow my children to play, things like that. And I think that it's something that I see people more and more, anecdotally, of course, taking their kids to Air House, taking their kids, like literally just not going anymore. And we're losing those public spaces. And that's concerning to me, as a mom and just.
So that one also comes back to our addiction crisis. Thanks. Destiny? Oh, sorry, Jennifer, I keep forgetting, I didn't see you there. Go ahead. Okay, continue to your top.
Sorry, that was directed at me?
Yes, yeah. If you want to do your top 2.
Yeah, I'll do my top one. It's quite specific. There is on Fitzwilliam, I guess you would call it the Bastion Street Bridge. I walk across that 2 or 3 times a week, and it's an important corridor, and it takes a lot of tourists and other individuals back and forth. There's great wayfinding. It's kind of one of the key downtown tourist areas. And when you're walking across, I'll say west, but inland, that entire slope is completely covered with garbage and graffiti. And there's a theory in planning called the broken window theory, where if you see, if you see an area that's covered in broken windows, then it's going to increase more crime because it's obviously not getting taken seriously. And more importantly, for my my number one. It makes people feel unsafe. And I heard that there were cruise ships coming back to Nanaimo, and I thought of that area, and it really made me cringe because it looks terrible. It makes the bridge seem really scary. It makes traveling through Nanaimo downtown really scary, and it's not putting our kind of our best foot forward in a time when I think we need all the tourism dollars and all the pedestrian, positive pedestrian traffic we can get.
So that would go towards cleanup of the, what do you call it? Shared spaces, I guess.
Well, it's private land, I think, but I know there's bylaws and there's tools in order to get that done. I think I saw in one of the reports that there was a grant program for repairing vandalism and kind of that kind of disorder. The outcomes of the drug disorder and the street disorder. So I hope that it's not just going to rest just on the businesses, and I hope that there's something that the city can do and this committee can promote in terms of just helping the businesses in that area and also compelling them or encouraging them to take those steps.
Okay, thank you. Kim? You did yours? Sorry, Destiny, yeah.
It's tied into what Ruth was saying, I think just more public access to public green spaces. I think the fencing of all of them is an unfortunate option that the city of Nanaimo tends to go with, and it ties into tourism as well. In the downtown core, people walking off cruise ships and all the green spaces are fenced off and inaccessible.
Yeah, we had to do that because of all the damage it was being caused. Okay, sorry, Kim, you're next.
So again, this goes to the point in time count and the disparity between, I think it's 30% of our people have a place to go at night or during the day, and 70% do not. And I think it came up at the last meeting that the perception of danger, real danger, and the perception of danger are almost the same because perception is everything. And so that goes to tourism, that goes to people who live here, that goes to needing more indoor spaces during the day, obviously overnight spaces for people to be safe, for the residents to feel safe, and for our unhoused folks to be safe. So again, that goes to like our housing crisis, our opioid crisis, and all of those things. But it's the perception of Nanaimo being dangerous. I walk down in the downtown area all the time, and I work or volunteer in that area. I don't feel as unsafe because I have had conversations with these people, and they are really just human beings trying to scrape by barely. So I think that removing that perception will go a long way, but that includes something that the city is not financially responsible for, which is getting these folks indoors.
Okay. James?
Again, it's not a specific one, but under the section on advocacy, I know there's some things that are much more specific, but I'm just interested in our ability to advocate provincial and federal on the issues we're bringing up.
Okay, thank you. Doug?
We have a really good bus system, but we have a really poor bus stop system. The buses are just stopping on the street and jamming up traffic, and they're not safe stops, they're not well thought out. And that might involve the regional district, but the buses are going to be more and more important all the years coming forward, and we need to put the proper pullouts. At least every third one should be one where the bus can pull safely off the road.
Okay, thank you. Scott?
I'm going to switch to my third one because it seems to fit with the theme that's
Okay.
going on. I do think Nanaimo has a serious image problem.
Oh, huge.
Like in a big way, and I do think there's a misperception around the dangerousness and some of the crime rates that were quoted incorrectly a few times here that I've heard, I think. So
We're number 30 in the country.
I think that the perception has caused people to think Nanaimo is a lot more dangerous than it is. Not that it's not, and not that there hasn't been cases, but I think like the Howard Johnson Hotel has sat there since there's so many eyesores in Nanaimo, it's unbelievable. There's graffiti all over VIU, all around Vancouver Island University. So I don't really know how to address that, but definitely ways, there's creative ways in the research to address all of those things. And the research has already been done and it's generalizable, I would say that too. We've talked a lot about gathering data, but there is tons of data in existence that's very generalizable here that we can use, that we don't have to do the work. So I think incorporating some best practices in some of this, and there's some creative stuff that I could talk about later.
Okay, yeah. And we used to have a graffiti task force, and we have two very well-trained people, like Barry Hornby was.
You had said restorative justice, and I've seen reparation initiatives
Yeah,
where
I
they
love
do
that.
restorative justice circles, and then the kids that are at risk of getting involved in gangs go out and clean up graffiti stuff and do some of that work and become connected. And restorative justice ties to all this too, because it makes community members aware of the real problems that the unsheltered are experiencing and sees that they're real people, and they change their view and things change. So I don't know. And Cowichan has a successful restorative justice program. So I'm not sure why
We do
can't-
too, it's just, it's not
Ours
funded.
is Howard Johnson.
Connect now. It's under
John
Con-
Howard.
Yeah,
Connect,
but it's under
yes.
Connect
Now
now,
it's
they
Connect,
changed
yeah.
it. But no, we used to have an extremely good one, like I was in charge of that at the detachment, so. But again, funding is not being put out by the province to keep pace with what we need, so. And the school does also have their own, I don't know if they still do you know if they still do? They had their own, maybe Eric knows, they had their own as well.
Yeah, I know that the liaison in regards of the restorative justice is a member from our youth liaison team, so, but to your point, it's been challenging even just for the volunteers side of things, because we need volunteers to lead. And we've had a few that's just, they just don't have the time anymore. So it's something that, and it's part of one of the priorities for the detachment. So we've had conversation and trying to revive the program. And like, it's still in existence, but it's really slow and backlog, unfortunately. So, so that's interesting. That's being brought up at the table, but.
I guess I wonder what Cowichan is doing differently, because they seem to have a very successful one. So, but maybe I can talk to some people and find out what's happening
I'll
there.
follow up with you after, because I
Because they
think
do. I have
we could
several
actually throw this down under advocacy too for more restorative justice and stuff.
Several VIU students
yeah.
were working there and
Yeah.
doing things.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll follow up with you after, because I was involved with a very unique one at the university, actually, where the girls peppered that girl's car and stuff. Okay, Colin?
Yeah, I'm going to skip to my third one here. Just on the point of the previous discussions, I think in one of my more impassioned emails to the province, I said that Nanaimo feels like the rug that the province likes to sweep its problems under. But I think that the city should be demanding that the province reimburse it for the municipal tax dollars spent supplementing provincial responsibilities and the predictable negative consequences of provincial public health and safety policies. And that includes things like fencing around green spaces to protect their assets. Fire department calls for emergency response medical aid due to drug overdose, vandalism abatement, community safety officers, clean teams on provincial land, encampment removal, et cetera.
Thank you. You guys got that one too? Perfect. I can't see that screen, so. Oh, Jennifer, you're up next. Thank you, guys.
I won't take up more committee time. My next proposals would have been more or less in line with what Colin has said, so I'll put an extra voice behind those.
Okay, thank you. Now Ruth, number 3.
Okay, so one of the things I looked into was business. One of the things I'm concerned about is that established businesses are closing and moving in and around like downtown and the south end especially. And so I looked into what other cities do to try to keep their businesses. I'm talking small businesses. I'm not talking Walmart here. I'm talking like Nanda's Chicken that was broken into 3 times in 1 month. I'm talking Friends of the Haven thrift store that closed after 26 years. I'm talking about Iron Oxide that moved. Small businesses that cannot keep their doors open, and people are losing their jobs and their livelihoods. That's a problem. I looked at what other cities were doing. Portland, Oregon, obviously epicenter of some serious issues. They have a program where small businesses can contact the city and apply for grants to do things like repair broken windows. Maybe you need a fence, you need some extra security, et cetera. I know that there's conflicts with the city putting money towards, businesses and things like that, am I understanding?
Under the community charter, we can't do a lot. Yeah.
But is there something that we can do? So if you are a mom and pop shop and you are white knuckling it through what are very hard times economically, plus with this, trifecta of issues, right? Is there a way for us to have something to give people, some hope to try to get through?
We do have those grants. We have them for broken windows, we have them for graffiti. And I think there's one other one. We have the clean teams that will go and do all that stuff. So we actually are ahead. It's just that it's constant, right? Dave, do you have something?
Yeah, with the Downtown Safety Action Plan that was brought in 2021, council gave in the first year $50,000 in grant money for a vandalism relief grant. For the 4 successive years, $30,000. And that's for businesses that have been the victims of crime. It's not proactive. Council reconsidered that program last December and included provisions that they could, after being victims of crime, also apply for grant money to put security measures like CCTV and gating, et cetera. But bear in mind, it's $30,000 a year, and it goes very quickly. I'll just lastly add that the province also has a $10.5 million annual program, which is similar, because our downtown, our vandalism relief grant is just for businesses downtown, and the provincial program would apply to businesses throughout the community.
Destiny?
I'm happy to discuss what's currently on the list.
Kim?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna sound like a broken record. Oops. I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but, a lot of the vandalism and issues around crime are people who are trying to survive. They're stealing, they're vandalizing, they have no place to be, so they're out in the streets with their spray can, and they're getting into trouble, breaking windows so they can steal things to get money to eat or to do whatever. So, I think that it's our opioid crisis and the housing crisis is the key to a lot of our issues, and we're throwing money at something that's just growing. So,
James? Good, okay.
I'd just like to be sure that we have good cybersecurity in place, because we're more of an internet town than many, and that's, just like to know that for sure.
I'll just touch on that a little bit. Carrie Ng, who's come to us before. Thank you. Thank goodness for Hillary getting my mic. I keep forgetting. We just have I think he came to us once before, Carrie, right? They're constantly working at our city cybersecurity stuff, and I know many other companies and corporations here, they're working with security firms within the city as well. So if you're talking about businesses, et cetera, too, Doug, and stuff, or just the city buildings?
The city stuff, the city, and everybody gets all that.
Okay, and I would say that, and I'm just going to get Mr. Lindsay to chime in here too, that Carrie's done a very, we actually, as counselors, had to do a cyber, different tests that would get sent to us regularly to make sure we're not taking phishing emails, all that. So we're getting that, staff's getting that. So, and if there's something you want to add, Mr. Lindsay?
No, just that it's a significant issue for everyone, but certainly local governments have been the targets recently, and there's been lots of horror stories. And you don't have to look very far from Nanaimo. You can look to Whistler and other places that have had to deal with this. So we're very much alive to it, and have been investing in training and new programs like authentication every time someone logs in now on their devices. So there's lots of steps we're taking.
And we just gave more money, I think it was 3 months ago, for a new security program to keep updating, so that, this council's very aware of the threats, and that's a really good point, because we could be out of a lot of money if we don't keep our security levels high. Thank you. Scott?
I don't think I have anything.
Okay. Colin?
Nothing more.
Okay. So, what would you like us to do? Go back to your number one, which is, I would say, addictions, right? Would that be fair to say? Everything seems to come back to addictions. That's on our number one list.
Just conversing with Natalie here, because Richard isn't here today, so we were just going to identifying which of these were the priority ones. So maybe we'll come back in a few minutes and highlight in yellow the ones that made it on the list, and then the committee can debate. Okay?
I'll just give a little bit of background on the bus stop thing that did come up. So, we get that some of the bus stops are city-owned, some are RDN-owned. So that's always problematic, right? We had to shut down the one on Dufferin Place because it was being used continually for drug use. Seniors were so scared, the neighborhood was scared, so that one got removed. There's a request from a lot of businesses to please remove the one on Comox by the Tim Hortons, because it's totally out of control, a lot of issues. Funny, we were just in Calgary for the FCM. They got a large homeless problem there too, but we never saw any open drug use. Well, you might have, but most of us didn't. It was really interesting. We ran into myself and Councillor Perino ran into a doctor from the emergency room who's now refusing to treat people with addictions. Quite interesting.
I used to live in Calgary,
yeah.
and actually going back to Calgary after the pandemic, I noticed a major change.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is concentrated around the C train stops.
Yeah, what is C-Train? I talked to the police there at length about the issues, and they're sure paid well, let me tell you. You want a good job, join the transit police in Calgary. But that a lot of the RDNs, like a lot of transit it belongs to the RDN, so that's, but there's 9 of us, or 8 of us that sit on the RDN board, so there's a lot of us there. I sit on the transit committee, so I know a lot about what's going on there, and we're looking at different ways, and we also have to look at once the new transit shelter comes in, like how is that going to be looked after? Is there going to be security, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's interesting when it comes to that, right? It's a lot of crime on transit.
I heard it mentioned about, the fact that we've got, it's addictions crisis, also a housing crisis. We've got a lot of public institutions that are provincially or federally run that that the city doesn't have control over. We have a cost of living, whether it's housing, groceries, everything. And, obviously at a public safety committee, and all these things affect public safety because it induces stress on the population. And so all of these stressors that are essentially, well, you use the word downloaded onto the public at large, you induce these kinds of social problems. And so I think that in this committee, being a collective voice for everybody in the community, and trying to use the voice to if the city of Nanaimo doesn't have the mandate to do something, it's certainly much better positioned to advocate and influence the province and the federal government than we are as individuals. I mean, Ruth and I can attest to just how difficult it is to get even information out of public institutions that don't want to give you the information. They will drag you through the mud. And I don't mean this in a partisan way. I just mean like these public institutions. It is so difficult to get information, the types of information that you need to make good decisions and even to have informed opinions on things. And there's so much of that lacking. So I do see that this committee can have, maybe try to help the public understand where the city is at when it comes to the information flow, bringing forward issues to the committee and to the chair, to the council. I mean, I just find that all of these issues, in recent years have become just overwhelming, and to the point where the public at large is bearing the brunt of an awful lot of downloaded abdication of responsibility and accountability at our public institutions. And so I think that there's an opportunity for us from a public safety point of view, because it's a public health and safety issue, all of these things.
I will tell you that at the Union of BC Municipalities, where we go every year, we have meetings with, quite often, the Solgen. Adrian Dix is on our list. We have these meetings regularly. The mayor is, as you know, he's probably the most quoted mayor in the province, if not the country, on the crime problem. He was just interviewed by the Washington Post on the issues here in Nanaimo and what we're doing and how we're trying to tackle the problems. So I don't think there's anybody as outspoken as our mayor on that this has got to get fixed, that this is, and that it's bigger than the city's able to do. We need support from the federal government. We need support from the provincial government. I think one of the reasons that the decriminalization didn't work as well, it's the same as Portland. You can't decriminalize until you get the supports in place for those people that want to go to detox and want treatment. That they sort of did it backwards, right? So we need to really push for, if we want to deal with the drug toxicity, where's the treatment programs for people that want it, et cetera? And anybody that's worked with that population knows, somebody tells you what they want to get clean, you got about an hour to get them someplace. It's not 3 months from now when hopefully you might be able to find them again, and they're still in the mindset that they want the help. So we do push for it constantly, and I think like you say, the more we can get people pushing for it, and I'll give the NDP government some credit in the fact that they listened to when the public said, you know what? We don't want the open drug use at schools and that kind of stuff. So they did try, and I think they are still trying, so, but we still have to keep up the pressure that, you know what? We need the drug treatment programs and detox for these people. So, yeah. Are we ready to go?
I just wanted to quickly say, as a committee, I think it's important for us to remember when we say we're speaking for the public or for the community, that our unhoused population and people who use substances are part of our community and they are part of the public, and that they're not othered as other.
I know a lot of them want treatment desperately and can't get it. Okay, so let's go here.
So we've compiled everyone's top picks. The one thing we were suggesting is perhaps to remove cybersecurity, just because I think that issue is already being addressed by the city, if that's okay. So we'll remove that one, and then, so this is where we are as of the discussion. So if committee just wants to take a quick minute to take a look and see if there was anything missing. If not, this would give staff enough to go back and work away at it to come back with a table for the committee to consider at the next meeting.
There's one thing I would like to add too on when it comes to advocacy, that we as mayor and council report what we're doing on advocacy. Like I've talked to our communications person about that, because people aren't aware how much the mayor does, how many times he's interviewed, the press releases, the meetings we've had, those that we can disclose. Like I think it's important for feedback coming back from the mayor and council as to exactly what the city has been doing around this. I think that, because I don't think people realize just how much work.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions, was why are we so far behind with regard to resources for our folks that are, looks like, or it sounds like, are causing the most issues in our city? Where was the advocacy? Where was the lobbying to get more money, to get more services? Why has it gotten to where it is now compared to Vancouver as far as housing and shelter and food programs go, and Victoria for housing and food programs? Why are we so far behind?
Actually, I think if you look, you'll find we're probably ahead of Victoria. We have more supportive housing units per capita?
No.
Not per capita?
No,
Oh.
no. Not the point in time.
Oh, I don't believe in the point in time,
Absolutely.
so that's probably why, yeah.
Yeah, but no, we're
No,
way
because I was
behind.
told we have more supportive housing units per capita. Like we have how many now? Almost 200 beds? Yeah. Yeah.
Those aren't homes, but.
No, but that's,
But I think they have way more than 200 in Victoria.
yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Can I ask why you don't believe the point-in-time data?
Because having participated in it and heard people, they're told to say they're from here. When we run their names, you find out very fast that they're not. They're told to identify as one way, and when you find out, they're not. So I really struggle with that. I believe in the numbers,
I see.
but I don't believe in a lot of the stats that are collected. Like, and I actually believe that number's low. I believe there's many more unhoused than what the point-in-time count shows.
And you're right about
Yeah, Hillary?
Well, just to like reiterate the point in time count, it is just that, it's just a point in time, and like everyone who gathers the data and analyzes it says it's an undercount. Like it's very well known that it's an undercount, and there's, you know, maybe a vested interest in not getting all of the data, because that would make the picture look much worse than it is. So it's a very blunt instrument, and in no way are we saying the point in time data like is an actual reflection of the real time situation in Nanaimo. But yes, as you said, we have a disproportionately high number of unhoused people with no access to any kind of shelter, and it's a very good question about why we haven't been able to keep up, but that speaks to the fact that we have nonprofit organizations trying to fill those gaps and without the adequate funding to do it.
And I'll just add too, that doesn't even look into your couch surfers. And we know there's a lot of youth and even seniors that are couch serving. Doesn't take into account half the people living in cars.
Yeah.
So, you know, or even in, like if you go like just over the border into Lanceville, like there's really, they're part of Nanaimo's population, but because they're over in the Lanceville side, so yeah. Colin?
Yeah, it really seems like we don't, like, and I don't know why this is, but it seems like nobody, whether it's the province or the city or health authorities really have a handle on the dynamics of the flow of the populations that are coming and going that are unhoused. Like, it's, the point in time count is one thing, and it's a snapshot, yes, but like, we're smarter than this, clearly. I mean, like, it seems like there is not sufficient effort, or maybe it's because people are concerned about confidentiality or what, but like, it seems like it's an imperative to understand how the unhoused population has changed and evolved over time, and there's immigration and emigration factors at play within BC and Canada that are just ignored. Anyway.
Okay, James?
Yeah, just a question about the work plan and how functionally that's going to direct this body.
I'll turn that over to Karen, who also had her hand up for something else.
Sorry, just before I forget, the Advisory Committee on Disability and Inclusiveness is actually working quite heavily on the transportation safety aspect, and the RDN has met with the committee, and I'm just wondering if we wanted to perhaps leave it with that committee or instead invite the RDN here to speak, or do we want to leave that on? Just throwing that out there initially. Councillor Eastmere would probably be able to speak best
I mean,
to it.
I think as chair of the accessibility committee, which Cheryl's also on, I would say, I think we've raised it, but it's more about just the purely like mobility, accessibility side, and I don't think it's really getting to the safety side of things, especially with how the transit stops are being used overnight and things like that. So I would like to see it on here.
Okay. Yeah. So the next step for the work plan is that if I was just trying to craft a little bit of a motion, basically that this committee refer the themes and topics to staff so that we can work with it and then come back to the next committee meeting with a bit of a more formalized work plan based on this to ensure that we've had an opportunity to look at it, to make sure it's within our jurisdiction, and also what can be accomplished within the committee's term.
Okay, Ruth?
So now that we've kind of narrowed it down to these 6 areas, and are we at a point where these are our committees? We're going to be having some debates about that, and we're going to have like a top 5 that's our committee, or how are we, like, what are the parameters of how much we're going to pare this down, I guess is what I'm asking.
That's up to the committee if you want to pare it down even more. Or you can just give direction to staff to work with what we've got here and then come back to the next meeting and a little bit more fleshed out view of it.
James?
Sorry, it's still not clear to me, once we have the priorities, the staff brings them back, how does that direct our work, or how do we interact with the work plan?
Everything that comes from this committee must now go to council as well. So once council has given its blessing, then you'll have, basically, for lack of a better word, a laminated version of what your work plan is. Staff will also flesh out timelines and identifying them. Like, for example, with some of the other committees, staff meet and we've got the marching orders and we start plugging them into meetings about when it can be achievable. Like, we know that this one's going to take 3 months, and what are the actions coming out of that directive, so that it becomes even a bit more of an expanded plan for the committee. Does that make sense? But it's just a little bit challenging to do right at this point.
Can I follow up? So we are, with this work plan, creating directives of city staff to undertake
We still need
these
to come
priorities?
back one more meeting to get a finalized version of this before it can go any further.
But then?
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
I'm happy to move what Ms. Robertson initially suggested about the staff taking this away and working on it. She worded it much better, and then coming back.
Just gotta remember.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Destiny. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Perfect. Okay.
Just one more thing, and I'm not sure if this was part of your question earlier on, and you were wondering how the committee interacted with council. The recommendations that come from this committee go forward on the council agenda in the form of what's called a consent agenda, which basically means council can pass one motion to adopt all the consent items that have come from the committees, unless they want to pull something out specifically. So let's just use today's example where there were 3 options with the speed zones. Let's just say there's been further reflection and there was a change of heart. Council always has the ability to pull that item from the consent agenda and put forward perhaps option 1, let's just say. That's just using it as an example of what it looks like. But in the absence of that, it's one motion and all the committee motions are endorsed. But we just do have to have council's endorsement.
Follow up. So council would have all this information available to them in, like, the 3 options or 4 options if you include the wild card. Like, they would be reviewing them as well.
Only the recommendation appears under the consent portion of the agenda, but certainly council has access to all the agendas. It's sent to all council members.
Any other discussion or concerns? Then I'm going to go to question period. And somebody had some questions back there?
Oh, I do, I have a bit of a statement.
I'm sorry. I didn't see that.
I don't know you could ask the statement, I just wish.
Oh, okay.
I'll sign up too if you want to get it.
Okay, so while they're doing that, I just did miss the potential special meeting dates. Options include July 31st or September 4th.
Can we vote for both?
I won't be here on the 31st, but Hillary, are you here? So Hillary's here, so she could chair if it goes. What do people think about July 31st for a special meeting, or are you available, or do you want to wait till September? September 4th is the other, if needed. Pardon? So that we can go over the work plan and stuff, right? Yeah. What are people's thoughts? Scott?
My thoughts for the mandate of this committee was to have a meeting every 2 months, but if something really important or time-sensitive arose, then we would have special meetings.
So do you want to wait till September then? September 4th?
Unless,
Oh,
unless
it's
someone
October?
convinces me that we need to do something.
Okay, so the next one's not till October then? People are, October 9th, people are good for October 9th?
No,
Colin?
I think that this committee, we've been at this since February, and this is the first time that we've actually discussed anything as a roundtable. I think we're, like, if anything, we need to pick up the pace and get some work done. Like, I would be voting for having a meeting monthly right now. At, like, definitely July 31st, and I'd do September, I'd do anything. I think this committee needs to start moving.
Well, the problem is we don't have staff capacity to meet monthly, number one. That's one of the big issues. So we can look at either July 31st or September 4th. Can you do both or no? I know I'm gone in July. And then August we shut down. Judge?
I moved September 4th, but mainly because of the staff issues.
Okay, your mic? Is there a seconder for September 4th? No? Oh, Destiny's seconding. Discussion?
Is that seconding or?
Yeah.
I'm just clarifying, we do have to pick one of these?
You don't have to. Right now, as it stands, your terms of reference outlined it, and the
October
key
9th.
date calendar has already been set by council. And so your next meeting would be October 9th, unless the committee passes a motion today that they would like to meet either on July 31st or September 4th.
So we have the motion for September 4th. Is there a discussion around that? Ruth?
I would just like to agree with Colin's with the sense of urgency that Colin is bringing. And I personally would like to meet on July 31st, just because, you know, we do have a lot of work ahead of us, and I feel like I don't want to lose momentum.
Okay.
Personally.
Any other discussion? Jennifer? Thank you.
My preference is also to meet in July. I think there is a sense of urgency in what we're doing, particularly if we look at the advocacy piece. There's a provincial election coming up, so, you know, the opportunity is now. I'll note as well, my battery might be dying soon, so if I cut out, that's my preference. Thanks.
Destiny?
What would quorum need to be for us to meet?
Yeah, so how many members are there?
There's 11 members, so 7 would be,
So let's
Six
do
would
it
be
this
quorum.
way. Right now, we have a motion on the floor, though, so if people don't agree with that for October, or for September 4th, we have to defeat that motion. Ms. Robertson?
I was just gonna.
under the options, there's July 31st and September 4th if needed. So perhaps if the committee wanted to meet in July 1st and then assess at that
31st.
time whether September would be
31st.
July 31st and then assess whether September 4th is needed
Okay, so
after that meeting.
But we've already got a motion on the floor.
Okay.
Yeah. So before we go to that motion, I'm going to ask, how many are available July 31st? 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't think we have quorum. Is Jennifer's there, so there's quorum? Okay. And how about for September 4th? So everybody's available then, but what we could do is then do the July one if you do have a quorum, and then if we need one, you'll make that decision in July?
Can we amend
It's
the
up to the
motion
committee.
so that it is, so that we?
We'll just defeat it and then make a new motion. Okay, all in favor of September 4th? Yeah, 1, 2, 3. So Armstrong, Herman, Coulthard, Brown, Cowling, Brody. Okay, those opposed? Taylor, Milbank, and, oh my God, Middleton. Motion carries, so it'll be September 4th.
Does the committee want to do both meetings?
Okay, is there a motion
Can
for
I,
July?
can I move that we also meet on July 31st?
Seconder? Seconded, Counselor Eastmere. Any discussion on that? Call the question, all those in favor? No, we've got Eastmere, Taylor, Middleton, and Milbank. Those opposed? Armstrong, Coulthard, Cowling, I can't see, Scott, sorry, Destiny, and James, I didn't see yours. Okay, is that? So he's in favor.
I'll vote against.
Against, so that means no July meeting. Nothing stopping you two from meeting with Hillary.
Because it's with the chair, right?
Yeah, and it's a bit late because we're just voting, but for the July date, there was only just barely half the people.
Yeah, it's just, we barely make quorum, and if somebody happens to be sick, there wouldn't be quorum.
Yeah.
I'm traveling, yeah. That's a big issue. Go ahead.
I guess because council is on a break for August anyway, and like nothing essentially will be happening at council, having it early in September, we'll be able to ratify our work plan and get it to council. So those of us who are concerned about timelines, like I also feel the urgency. It's just, it's a tough time of year, and we'll be stronger once we manage to do this all together and have that collective voice, and we'll keep up the advocacy. But that said, we're talking provincial election, that's October. So we're also going to run out of time on that. So continue to use your voices individually. And yeah, I look forward to getting this work plan going, and we'll keep on it for sure.
Yeah.
I would definitely be open to like emailing each other and things like that in the meantime. Now, I don't know if that's an option.
Yeah, we have to be very careful, because then it
Yeah.
can do, so I'm going to let Ms. Roberts.
I would suggest that people do their homework when they come to the next meeting so that we're
No,
really prepared.
That's true, and if you have a concern, there's nothing wrong with sending it to the chairs, just to the 2 chairs, not all the committee, because then it doesn't become a thing, so that we're aware of what your concerns are, so we can maybe add it to the agenda, correct?
Yeah, either that or just legislative support, because one of the things that the committee can't do is to debate items amongst themselves outside of the committee table. So either to your 2 chairs
Yeah.
or legislative
Yeah, because we're
support.
pretty good, we won't debate it, we'll just say yes, we'll put it on the agenda, or no, we can't, so, go ahead, Scott.
And when will we get the list of organized things? Or, I don't need a date.
It will
but-
be brought back to the next committee meeting.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so,
There was discussion at the very start of the meeting that there's confusion about the email addresses. Like, I don't have the counselors' email addresses. Only email address I have is like Sheila's or the legislative, well, actually, it's not even Sheila's.
No, we'll get legislative services. Thank you, Hillary. We'll get legislative services to send out my email and Hillary's email. Okay, now we are going to go, Ms. Robertson?
Sorry, and just further to that, in terms of the list, you will also see the list on today's, or from the minutes from today, so that you'll see it in draft form, and then the finalized list will come back to the next committee for formal endorsement, okay?
Question period. Now we have question period. Kevin, are you on question period?
Yeah, I'll let this lady go first.
Okay, and your name, ma'am?
Hello,
And your name?
my name is Stephanie Mead.
Okay, yeah, and your question?
I do need to give a touch of context. I hope that's okay. I am a person who has facilitated programs in Nanaimo for Food Share and Growing Opportunity, as well as Learning Alternatives program at Barsby, and taught in a lot of the schools for food education, as well as helping differing ability children and people with challenges find work and get off the streets. I've seen a lot of success stories, and I've seen failures as well. This past year, Rise Bridge was allowed to operate in our neighborhood, 2 doors down from me, and we went through a whole lot. The police and council know what we've been through. My community, I've been speaking with and keeping in touch with my neighbors, and we're very afraid of what's coming for us this winter. I'm here today to make sure that it doesn't happen again or to any other neighborhood in Nanaimo. I'm trying to see solutions, as I do want there to be services available for people struggling with homelessness and addiction. However, we cannot wear rose-colored glasses when it comes to the nature of these people and the struggles they go through. They have heavy addiction issues, mental illness, and are known convicted criminals of rape, assault, and theft, to name a few. My only firm knowing is that these services, whether it be warming shelters, clinics, etc., need to be placed outside of residential communities. To put our people in harm's way with known hazards cannot continue. My neighborhood will not tolerate it moving forward. However, we support services being placed outside of residential communities. We will be following closely how the city chooses to handle these issues, and will be absolutely standing up for the safety of our home and the people we love. We are very aware of the mishandling of the implementation of Rise Bridge, and we have watched as council made the choice to do so, knowing full well what they were bringing to our home. You cannot and will not trade our safety for theirs. How will council move forward knowing that they have broken the law and knowingly put people in harm's way when implementing these services in our communities? Also, I would like to agree that you should probably have more meetings regarding solving the issues of safety that have been discussed today.
Do you have a question for the committee?
I'll repeat it. How will council move forward knowing they have broken the law and knowingly put people in harm's way when implementing these services in our community?
This is for the Public Safety Committee. That question you would have to ask for council. They can't speak to that.
That's okay. I want you all to know about it, and I understand you have compassion for these people. You should. They have a chance. They have a shot at life if things are given to them appropriately. But so far, it's been Band-Aid solutions, warming shelters that aren't really warming shelters and are busiest on the hottest of days, where they come outside and shoot up. They break into our home. They threaten us outside, and we're afraid to go inside or to come outside of our home. We need you guys to stand up for us more. We need you to hold people accountable, people that are making these decisions.
Thank you, Ms. Mead. I think you heard that that was a thing that came forward from this committee, that they do want to see BC Housing come together with a plan so that we are hearing from the public what the expectations are for anything setting up. So I think your voice is heard here, and that will certainly be part of our work plan when it comes to advocacy and as well as the addictions issue.
I hope that you hear my words when I say that please do not implement these services in residential communities anymore. Families do not deserve to see what they have seen. Body bags being brought out of homes, people being threatened, people moving.
Is there a motion that we can make from this committee regarding the concern that's been raised?
Well, I think it's part of our work plan, like, we understand that's part of the work plan. Like, I think that, I think the place for Ms. Mead to also come is to council as well, to put that forward, that concern at the council table.
We have come together as a community to do so.
Yeah, and I think that's where it belongs, but I can tell you, two of us have heard it. This is public, so anybody that wants to watch this meeting can watch it. I know our CAO has heard it, our bylaws, we know your messaging. Some of this is out of our control, some is in our control.
Everything's in your control.
No, it's not, actually.
Yes, it is. You have to do something and you have to do it.
Let's.
We're not going to get into an argument, but I will just tell
It's
you.
a fact.
The province supersedes what the city wants to do. If the province decides, just like they did on terminal, or not terminal, on terminal, they can put that in without council's approval.
Council approved it.
No, they didn't.
There's some specificity.
Yes, they did. I saw it.
No.
There's some specificity.
We're not going to get
We're
into an
just-
argument. We're
yeah.
stopping this now, but thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Kevin?
I'll just have a, little quick seat. Thank you. 5:45. Two quick questions and an observation, Chair Armstrong. I'd just like to know, if I may, from the fire chief, Mr. Doyle, about there was a fire yesterday on Esplanade. It was just, set by somebody addicted on our streets. And I just wanted to get back to what I asked you and Inspector Burton before, because the engine did arrive. It put the fire out with a bucket of water. I didn't see any police presence come to that, so I'm just wondering, remember we talked before, Andrew and me and you? So where are we at with that, please?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for reminding me there. I did look into it. So it's just an allocation of resources. So what happens is that the call goes from cell phone, landline, whatever, it goes to ECOM, which is in the majority of the province, essentially 99.9% of the province. They're the primary public safety answering point. Goes in there, police, fire, ambulance. They can only dispatch to one agency. So they will typically dispatch, they will always dispatch the primary agency. That being, if it's a fire, if the primary emergency is fire, it goes to fire. From there, the caller will speak to the fire dispatch center. They'll solicit information about the fire, and perhaps on the police side or ambulance side, whatever the other agencies that need to attend are. In some cases, to your point, additional resources aren't dispatched. In some cases, they are. It really is based on the matrix of questions asked. In the cases that they're not, typically it's because the way the information's taken in is that they allow the initial responder decide whether more resources are needed to prevent a duplication of resources, unnecessary duplication of resources. Unfortunately, sometimes, to your point, it's not unnecessary if you're, I think the example you were giving last time was if there was a suspect on scene and fire had been arrives and the firefighters and sirens and activity scare the suspect away. So.
Thanks, Chief Doyle, but I'm still Chair. I still think police should be called in that matter, because then if there's a second fire set or a third fire later that night, we have not ID'd that person or perhaps prevented it, because your men are not, or women are not trained to do anything for that. They leave, this person goes and lights another fire. I'm just trying to get into the prevention mode, as you're saying.
I'll leave that between the chief and Inspector Rochette to discuss.
Okay.
Thank you.
Second question is for roads, if I may. And I heard about Metro Drive, and the chair, through you to the person, if she would. I heard about the traffic calming, and traffic is moving slower now because of the extended sidewalks and bike lanes. So I'm wondering then, what's the road count of vehicles going through there now with the traffic calming? What was it before that work was done on Metro? Are we seeing fewer vehicles now coming through Metro than we were before?
Through the chair to the guest, the traffic volumes haven't changed at all on Metro.
So therefore, it's just the speed that is slowing, is that right? You've still got the volume? or not? Or not even the speed, it's still the same?
The speeds went down from higher than 50 kmh to closer to 50 kmh, and the traffic volumes didn't reduce. The traffic volumes are the same.
Okay, so is there more, through the chair, is there more congestion on Metro now then?
I would say not, because the traffic volumes are below the road's capacity.
Okay.
Depends on what-
I guess
how
I'm
you view
driving at the
congestion.
inopportune times, then I must be driving during rush hour or something. Anyway, thank you for that, and just one thing when it comes back, because I've been fighting the graffiti and the garbage, et cetera, downtown, and I appreciate that being brought up by the committee. The other thing to add to the graffiti and the garbage, though, is also stickers and posters that are put on city light poles, et cetera. And when I had talked to some city staff before, nothing was really being done for that. So I would like that, if it could, Chair, be added to the list as well, because there's a lot of stickers and posters and more get put on, and nobody, as far as I can tell, seems to be looking after that aspect yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Any further
Thank you, committee.
questions? Seeing none, could I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Kim, seconded by Ruth, all in favor? Thank you all. Well, 10 minutes to spare.
Thank you very much.